Chapter 285. Even though he was lectured by Tong Lan again about why the flowers were so red, he was still delighted. After all, it was one's own strength. The feeling of being stronger than before, and being filled with power still filled one with joy. To be honest, stepping into the man-will level was only the beginning. It had only been 6 months since he came to this world. To be able to reach this level was already enough to make him happy and a little proud. He was indeed a talent. In just over 6 months, he had already reached the man-will level without any foundation. After careful calculation, he realized that he had only been cultivating for 4 months at most. Only 1 in 1,000 practitioners could attain the man-will level. This was the difference between geniuses and mortals. Furthermore, if he reached the man-will level before Dayo's new year, it wouldn't be too embarrassing for him to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest. Rinpoche hummed a tune as he arrived at Yangxin Palace Hall. He then heard a cold snort and a voice full of murderous intent. "He's courting death. Find out where he is." When Rinpoche entered Yangxin Palace Hall, he saw 2 tall and sturdy men wearing leather armor. The leather armor looked a little old, and there were traces of swords and knives on it. "You guys can leave first." "Find him," the Water Empress said coldly. "Yes, Your Majesty." The 2 of them cupped their hands in greeting before turning around and leaving. However, their expressions were somewhat troubled. It would not be easy to find an expert like Lu Pinghai. If he was in Dayo, it would be easy to find him. However, the other party's main activity area was in Great Xia, and it was extremely difficult to find him. When they turned around, Rinpoche realized that they were twins. If he remembered correctly, they should be from the Protectorate of the North. He had seen them from afar in Ping City. After the 2 left, Rinpoche stepped forward and asked, "Your Majesty, why are you so angry?" "I'm looking for Lu Pinghai to exchange for something. I'll even let him ask for anything he wants. As long as it's not too much, I'll agree. However, he thinks too highly of himself and actually rejected me." The Empress was still angry. Rinpoche smiled bitterly. This seemed to be normal. However, this wasn't normal in the eyes of the Empress. The name Lu Pinghai sounded familiar. Rinpoche thought about it carefully and realized that he was the 8th most powerful expert in the world. He had done some homework these few days. "Is it very important?" Rinpoche probed. The Empress was so angry, and her target was the 8th most powerful expert in the world. Presumably, the item was very important. "You can say that," the Water Empress replied. The Spirit Yuan pill was of no use to her, and was completely for Rinpoche. At that time, because Rinpoche's physical foundation was too weak, he could only cultivate Rui visualization. Therefore, she asked Hongwu to send someone to look for Lu Pinghai to exchange for a Spirit Yuan pill that could supplement his physical foundation and increase his cultivation speed with the remaining medicinal power. However, Rinpoche actually smoothly reached the most important threshold of Rui visualization and attained the man-will level within a few months. Furthermore, this Rui visualization did have some tricks up its sleeves. It was able to strengthen a person's foundation with such a poor foundation and allow him to enter the man-will level steadily. It was just that the consumption was a little too high. However, whether the elixir was useful or not was one thing, and whether Lu Pinghai would give it to him or not was another matter. She was still quite angry at Lu Pinghai for rejecting her. This was her personality. She had given her conditions, and as long as it wasn't too much, she would agree to it. "If you refuse me, I will beat you to death." That Lu Pinghai really doesn't know how to appreciate favors. As long as we find him, throw a bottle of sarin gas at him, and bring back the things he has on him. Rinpoche acted like an incompetent advisor. No matter which side he was on, he was definitely on the Empress's side. He just had to remember 2 things. First, the Empress was always right. Second, please refer to the first thing. The Empress felt very gratified after listening to his words. He relied on the fact that even if someone found him, he would be long gone by the time I arrived. No one else could keep up with his speed. Otherwise, I will meet him personally and see what else he has to say before he dies. The Empress was a little annoyed. Even though she had asked the 2 brothers to investigate, she knew that it wasn't very meaningful. Rinpoche thought for a while. Without satellites, it wasn't very realistic to use a tracking device. There was no other way. He doesn't have a fixed place? Renbachian asked curiously. His whereabouts have always been secretive. He only goes to a fishing village in the East Sea for a few days at the end of November every year. That's hard to say. When he goes there again next year, we can just wait there. The Empress nodded her head slightly. Her current goal had already changed. Previously, her goal was to obtain the Spirit Yuan pill. Now her goal was to kill Lu Pinghai. Since this was the case, there was no harm in letting him live for another year. Do you have any candidates for the lantern-grabbing contest? The Empress changed the topic and asked. She really wanted to see how Renbachian would perform. Can't we just choose a few young imperial guards from the palace? Renbachian asked in reply. I'm afraid we can't find 9 people below the age of 25 in the palace, the Empress said. There were very few new imperial guards in the palace. Most of them were left behind by the previous emperor. Over the years, there were very few replacements. Renbachian was stunned and his eyes widened. He really didn't expect this problem. He actually couldn't even find 9 people below the age of 25 in the palace. Go and ask Xianja how many imperial guards are below the age of 25 in the palace. The Empress instructed someone behind her. Qing Yuan hurriedly left the hall. After a while, Qing Yuan returned and said to the Empress, Your Majesty, there are 3. The Empress turned to Renbachian and said, You are still short of 6 people. Think of a way yourself. Renbachian scratched his head. It was easy to find people because there were so many of them on the streets. However, he couldn't possibly find a few ordinary people to make up the numbers, right? It wouldn't look good on him. Even though he didn't want to win the championship, he couldn't be too embarrassing. It seemed like he had to look for reinforcements. Renbachian pondered for a while. He was more familiar with the people in the Ministry of Works. It was better to seek help from that old man, Tong Jingye. He brought the Imperial Guards out of the palace and went straight to the Ministry of Works. Only then did he find out that the Ministry of Works didn't have much to do as it was nearing the end of the year. Tong Jingye had already returned home. Renbachian hurriedly brought his men to the Tong residence. After explaining the purpose of his visit to the gatekeeper, he waited outside. After the time it took to burn 2 incense sticks, Renbachian was finally brought in. Just a few steps into the door, he saw a little Lolita in white jumping out with a female guard following behind her. Good for nothing, why are you here? The little Lolita was very surprised. In view of the inhumane things that you have done to me, I'm going to deduct the 3,000 taels of silver that I owe your family as compensation for your mental distress. Out of morality, I'm here to inform your grandfather. Renbachian had a look of, you are the main culprit on his face. It's fine if you call me good for nothing in the palace. Seeing that you are still a child, I won't lower myself to your level. You still dare to call me that outside? Where can I put my face? I specially asked my grandfather, and he said that you have given him the money you owe. The little Lolita raised her head and looked at him with disdain. If he didn't give me the money, I still have to beat him up. Grandfather said that if you don't give me the money, I will beat you to death. I heard that you are going to learn from me in half a month. Heaven and earth are the basis of life. The ancestors are the basis of life. The ruler and the teacher are the basis of governance. Remember to respect your teacher. Renbachian's face changed into a patient expression. Tonglan blinked her eyes and looked at him blankly. What are you talking about? A teacher for a day, a father for life. Just remember this. I would like to have another son, but I'm afraid that Her Majesty won't agree. The voice of the old man, Tong Jingye, sounded faintly from the side. Renbachian wanted to curse. Damn it! He had forgotten about this. Chapter 286. Renbachian explained the purpose of his visit to Tong Jingye in the guest room. Tong Jingye stroked his beard and said, I have a grandson who is 18 years old this year. His strength is pretty good. Renbachian was originally prepared to borrow a few people with similar strength. He didn't expect Tong Jingye to actually have a grandson. But he seems to have formed a team with a few friends. The second half of Tang Xingye's sentence made Rinpochian swallow the words that he was about to blurt out. Why are you telling me this when you already have a team? Are you trying to show off that you have a grandson? Rinpochian started to feel that it was a mistake to look for Tang Xingye. This old man wasn't reliable at all. Why don't you bring Tonglan along? Rinpochian almost choked. He was going to grab a lantern. What was the point of bringing a little loli along? Look, she's still a bit stronger than you. At the very least, you can't beat her. She'll probably think that you're a burden, but with this old man's help, she'll still agree. Over the years, there have also been female teams that have participated in the lantern grabbing contest, Tang Xingye said as he spread his hands. Tang Xingye's words rendered Rinpochian speechless. He really wasn't a match for that little Lolita. Lend me a few earth-will-level servants. The people from the Ministry of Works will do as well. As for Tonglan, forget about it. It won't be good if she gets hurt while snatching the lanterns, Rinpochian said. Tang Xingye looked at Rinpochian for a long time, as if he was looking at a retard. Even Rinpochian felt uncomfortable. Do you think young people with that level of strength are all cabbages? If he had that kind of strength at that age, he would have joined the army long ago. In the army, he would have been worth nurturing. How could he have become a servant? Those who had such strength at this age were mostly the sons of the imperial court officials, or the talented commoners in Lan City. Every year, the young people who perform outstandingly in the lantern-grabbing competition, if they don't have a family background, are immediately recruited into the army or the Public Order Bureau or the Monitoring Division. Rinpochian was slightly stunned. All the imperial guards in the palace were at the earth-will level. He was used to seeing them and had forgotten about this point. However, he didn't know the second half of Tang Xingye's words. It turned out that the lantern-grabbing competition was also used to select talented young people. But thinking about it, this was indeed a good idea. Rinpochian suddenly thought of something and asked, "Do we have any examinations like the military selections?" "What is the military selection?" Tang Xingye asked curiously. Tang Xingye stroked his beard and said, "It's almost the same as the Wushu examination in Great Xia." However, Dayo didn't have such a combat examination. This was because in the 70 years since the founding of Dayo, there had only been 3 emperors. The first was the founding emperor, Yapeng. During his era, it could be said that there were experts everywhere in Dayo. Any random person from the imperial court was not a weakling. In addition, the lifespans of the aboriginals were long to begin with, so they didn't need to replace the old with the new like in other countries. The imperial court already had its own people, so they didn't pay much attention to the selection of talents. However, that group of people had disappeared along with Yapeng. According to Rinpochian, he was so engrossed in cultivation that his whereabouts were unknown. However, everyone knew that there was definitely something they didn't know. Perhaps only those who had reached Yapeng's level of strength would know. All these years, Hongwu's biggest wish was to find out why that group of people had left and where they had gone. According to his guess, it should be in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. The second emperor was the former emperor. He reigned for the longest time, 42 years. When he succeeded the throne, it was also when Dayo was at its weakest. Almost all the experts of the older generation had left with Yapeng. At that time, he had chosen some talents. Some of them were the descendants of the previous experts such as Tang Xingye and Hongwu. Some of them were young experts that he had chosen from the villages in the 60,000 mountains, and were now mainly in the protectorates. One of the more famous ones was Shiwangu, the Protector General of the South. He wasn't much weaker than Hongwu. However, Hongwu was already more than 60 years old this year, while Shiwangu was only 40. It was believed that when Shiwangu reached Hongwu's level of strength, he wouldn't be weaker than Hongwu. Shiwangu's reputation in Dayo was extremely great, especially among the remnant citizens of the Han nation in the south. After that, it was the Empress. After one of his trips, the former emperor returned with serious injuries. He entrusted his orphan to Hongwu and then disappeared. At present, the imperial court of Dayo was still filled with the people left behind by the former emperor. Due to these various reasons, Dayo didn't have a talent selection system like Great Xia did. Instead, it was a system similar to a recommendation system. In addition to these historical reasons, There was another important point, which was that most of the commoners weren't educated. The best way out was to advance step by step in places like the army. Although the children of the court officials weren't highly educated, they were at least literate. They were influenced by what they saw since young, and were more knowledgeable. After passing certain examinations, they were sent to various departments. After chatting with Tong Jinya for a while, Renbaqian finally understood some of the current patterns in Dayo. In the end, it was because Dayo had only been founded for a short period of time. In addition, the lifespan of the Aboriginal experts was too long. For example, Hongwu, Shiwangu, Tong Jinya Qin Chuan, and the others could almost live to about 200 years old. There was no need to worry about the replacement of the old. As a result, no one realized the problem. It might take another few decades to 100 years for the hidden dangers to emerge. Renbaqian and Tong Jinya chatted for a while. Someone knocked on the door to inform him that it was lunchtime. Renbaqian then realized that it was already noon and hurried back to the palace. On this trip to the Tong residence, Renbaqian's team had 3 more people. They were the little girl, Tong Lan, and Tong Jinya's 2 nephews. There were 3 guards in the palace and 4 people including himself. At present, there were only 3 people left. Renbaqian thought about it, and thought of someone he knew. However, he didn't know how his situation was, and whether he had a team now. It was Du Changkong, whom Renbaqian met during the Great Hunt. He showed off his crossbow and ended up causing a lot of trouble. At that time, Renbaqian was prepared to exchange items from Earth for martial arts manuals. In the end, he didn't use them and never saw him again. Even though Du Changkong was a useless teammate, Renbaqian still had a good impression of him. The next day, Renbaqian asked around and went to the Du residence. Renbaqian was considered a well-known figure in Lan City. No matter where he went, as long as people saw the guards around him, they would immediately know who he was. He was the gigolo who brought a group of palace guards around to show off every day. There was no one else but him. Second young master went out just now. Deputy Prefect Ren, why don't you wait in the residence for a while? I will go and look for him now. The burly man who was acting as the gatekeeper cupped his hands and said, No need, just tell me where he is. He might be drinking at Shanhui House at this time. The burly man said. Shanhui House, what a strange name. Do you know where it is? Renbaqian turned his head and asked. It's on Jingyang Street. It's owned by the people of Shanhui Village. Usually many descendants of the court officials go there, Su Wei said. Renbaqian nodded. It's a gathering place for the descendants of the court officials. After a while, Renbaqian appeared in front of a shop with his guards. This shop was inconspicuous and didn't have any signboards. There were only 2 square wooden signs at the door. One of them had the words wine, and the other had the words meat. This is rather interesting. Renbaqian laughed and said to Su Wei, Go up and ask Du Changkong to come down. I won't be going up. That guy is actually here. Someone on the 2nd floor of the restaurant looked down and exclaimed in surprise. Who? Someone at the side craned his neck to take a look. Why is it him? Young Sparrowhawk, your opponent is here. Young Sparrowhawk has so many enemies. How would she know who it is? Someone at the side laughed. The others laughed as well. Lu Royao directly picked up the wine jar and smashed it over. The man pushed the bottom of the jar with his empty hand, and the force that was flying horizontally was suddenly turned upwards by him. Then he caught the falling jar and smiled. Treating me to a drink? I won't stand on ceremony then. Whenever she mentions it, she grits her teeth, but she can't do anything about it. The young man who was looking out of the window earlier turned his head and said. This time, more than 10 people immediately quietened down. Once this was said, everyone knew who it was. These days, they had been talking about him a lot. Soon after, everyone had a question. What is he doing here? Is Du Changkong around? Su Wei went up to the 2nd floor and asked. Everyone's gaze immediately turned to a mature-looking man who looked to be in his 30s or 40s. Me? Du Changkong pointed at himself with his finger. He was a little surprised as he didn't expect Du Changkong to be looking for him. After such a long time, he thought that Du Changkong had already forgotten about him. Chapter 287. Du Changkong did not know why Renbaqian was looking for him. With this thought in mind, he went downstairs and saw Renbaqian standing there with a circle of guards surrounding him. Compared to when they first met, Renbaqian was indeed a lot darker, but he was also a lot more well-dressed. The most important change was that he was full of vigor. Back then, Renbaqian was still somewhat listless and less courageous. He gave off a much more reserved vibe. Now, with the changes in his status, strength, and outlook, he was no longer the same as he was in the past. Deputy Prefect Run. Du Changkong cupped his hands. Brother Du. Renbaqian carefully sized up Du Changkong. He looked mature and mature. Although he was 17 or 18 years old, he looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. He gave off the impression that he was a steady and reliable person. However, after dealing with Du Changkong once, he knew that this was just a facade. Du Changkong was a fraud and a typical pig-like teammate. But who asked him to be short of manpower now? I haven't seen you for a long time. Previously, I said that I would look for Brother Du after I came back. In the end, one thing led to another, and I haven't been able to get away. Renbaqian hooked his arm around Du Changkong's shoulder. However, Du Changkong was taller than him by a head and had a strong physique. This made Renbaqian rather uncomfortable, and he put his arm down. It's good that Deputy Prefect Ren remembers me. Du Changkong grinned. Why is Deputy Prefect Du looking for me? Du Changkong hesitated for a while before asking. With Renbaqian's current status, he was definitely not here to reminisce about the past. You know about the lantern-grabbing contest during the new year, right? Do you have a team? I'm still short of one person, so I immediately thought of you. After all, we are acquaintances, and I'm confident in your abilities. Renbaqian patted him on the shoulder. My brother and I formed a team. We have 4 people. Du Changkong felt a little awkward. In fact, he was well aware of Renbaqian's strength. He could tell at a glance. However, he didn't really care about winning or losing. Friendship came first, competition came second, and participation was the most important. Furthermore, everyone knew that the Empress thought highly of Renbaqian. Since they had interacted with each other before, it would be a good thing to use this opportunity to build a good relationship with him. Even though the Aboriginals were known to be straightforward, they were still capable of such calculations. How's his strength? Renbaqian asked. Slightly worse than me. Du Changkong said after thinking for a while. That's easy. All 4 of you come in. It's settled then. Renbaqian laughed heartily. This was a good thing. For people could come in directly, and one of the palace guards could be removed later. Otherwise, if the weakest one was eliminated based on strength, it would be him without a doubt. Other than himself or the palace guards, excluding the Tong clan, Du Changkong and the rest, it would not be good. How should we divide the work? Du Changkong asked. The lantern-grabbing team was usually made up of 10 people, and there were all kinds of roles. For example, the one in charge of opening the way was called Tooth Gate, the one in charge of snatching the lanterns was called Lantern Head, and the one in charge of preventing others from interfering with their own team and interfering with other teams was called Broom Pole. Of course, this was only a rough division. In reality, it was possible that the lamp holder had been killed, and Fong Men or Broom had come forward to snatch the lamp. Just like on the football field, a goalkeeper could also run into the opponent's penalty area to shoot. Let's meet the day after tomorrow, Renbaqian said. Who else is there besides us? Du Changkong asked. Do you know Tong Lan? The granddaughter of the Minister of Works, Sir Tong. When Renbaqian mentioned this name, Du Changkong's expression immediately became weird. It was as if he had a toothache or constipation. Why don't I introduce a few people to you? Du Changkong's face twitched, and he seemed to want to retreat. Why? Renbaqian became curious. Du Changkong had such an expression when he heard Tong Lan's name. Was Tong Lan so powerful? That lass's mouth is too smelly. Furthermore, she is so young, and it would be a joke to be in a team with her. Renbaqian agreed with the first sentence. That lass's mouth was indeed smelly. Renbaqian patted Du Changkong's shoulder and said, It doesn't matter if her mouth is smelly or if she is young, but you have to take a long-term view. With your current mentality, you deserve to be single. Du Changkong was dumbfounded. What was Deputy Prefect Rin talking about? It's decided. Let's do it the day after tomorrow morning. The location will be at the training field beside the palace. Rin Baqian decided on this matter. Without waiting for Du Changkong to speak, he immediately got on the fork-horned cow and brought everyone back to the palace. Du Changkong rubbed his head. Other things were fine, but that last Tonglan was really too annoying. When they went upstairs, a few people looked at them and asked, "You have dealings with that person?" "I borrowed a crossbow from him in the past. She knows about it." Du Changkong pointed at Sparrowhawk. Her face immediately turned black. He was touching a sore spot. Because of that crossbow, she was reprimanded by Ren Baqian, lost face in front of the Empress, and was eventually punished. On the other hand, that person had a meteoric rise. He was even chosen as the Empress's husband. Du Changkong's words were simply a slap to her face. "Why did he look for you?" someone asked curiously. "Lantern grabbing." Du Changkong sat at the side of the table and said in a muffled voice, "He wants to participate in the lantern grabbing?" Everyone was surprised. That person's strength was similar to that of an ant to them. He could be killed with a light punch. Yet he actually wanted to participate in the lantern grabbing? Was he going to participate in the lantern grabbing or blackmail? Who would dare to touch him? He would probably be sent flying if he was squeezed. Du Changkong nodded his head and did not mention that Ren Baqian's strength had improved tremendously. His strength was equivalent to that of a man-will expert in Great Xia. To everyone he was still very weak. "You agreed?" someone asked. "I agreed." Du Changkong spread out his hands. Humph. A cold snort was heard. Without looking, everyone knew it was Lu Ruoyao. "I'm afraid that you won't even be able to get close to him." Lu Ruoyao sneered. "That's none of your business." Du Changkong wasn't a kind person. He was only afraid of Hong Xian. He didn't really care about Lu Ruoyao. Lu Ruoyao was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She was prepared to look for Hong Xian in a while. Originally, Hong Xian said that she wouldn't participate this year. However, since that person dared to participate, Hong Xian might be interested. She wouldn't be able to touch him during normal times. However, since he dared to participate in the lantern grabbing contest, he couldn't be blamed if he got seriously injured with just a light touch. In fact, she wasn't the only one who had this thought. After all, the Empress was the idol of many people in Dayo. Ren Baqian was still hated by many people. When they heard this news, several of them wondered if they would accidentally lightly touch him when the time came. Even though the others had this thought in their minds, they didn't show it. 2 days later, Ren Baqian left the palace early in the morning and went straight to the training field. At this time, it was time to change shifts and there weren't many people there. When he arrived, Du Changkong was already there with 3 other people beside him. 4 of them were squatting by the wall, eating a super large burrito in their hands. Deputy Prefect Ren. Du Changkong stood up and greeted Ren Baqian when he saw him. "Brother Du." Ren Baqian got off his fork-horned cow and sized up the other 3 people. They looked a little like Du Changkong, but they weren't as old as Du Changkong. Those who didn't know would think that it was a father bringing his 3 sons out. Du Changyue, Du Changqing, and Du Changjiang are all my brothers. Deputy Prefect Ren, call me by my name. Otherwise I'll feel awkward. Du Changkong introduced them in a low and muffled voice. "Nice to meet you." Ren Baqian cupped his fists. The few of them quickly returned the greeting and sized up this legendary figure curiously. "That girl isn't here yet?" Ren Baqian turned his head to look. The few of them waited for more than an hour before they finally saw the few of them. Tonglan was standing on the back of a fork-horned cow. When she got closer, she flipped over and jumped down. She stretched out her finger and pointed at Ren Baqian. With a face full of displeasure, she said, "You are such a good-for-nothing, yet you still dare to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest? You even persuaded Grandpa to let me team up with you. I might as well watch the show while eating fruits at the side since I can't win anyway. And these few, even though they are slightly better than you, they are still good-for-nothings. If I team up with all of you, others will easily think that I'm the same kind of trash as you. I'm still so young. How am I going to face others in the future?" Tonglan pointed at Ren Baqian, the Du brothers, and the two young men who were smiling bitterly behind her. Can you beat her? Renbaqian turned his head and asked Du Changkong. Du Changkong looked like he was in pain, but he couldn't flare up. In the end, he shook his head sullenly. If Renbaqian hadn't been staring at him, he wouldn't have noticed it. Renbaqian widened his eyes. Du Changkong actually couldn't beat this girl? I still thought that she was only slightly more talented than ordinary children. In addition, she had been nurtured since young, so her martial arts were slightly better than ordinary children. That was why the Empress allowed her to be his sparring partner. It turned out that she wasn't a little girl, but a demoness. He had actually been tricked by the Empress for so long? To think that he had always felt that he couldn't even beat a 10-year-old child. It turned out that he wasn't alone. Chapter 288. Early in the morning, a group of people were scolded by a little loli, but they couldn't refute her. Their faces were twitching, and their faces were as black as the bottom of a pot. Only Renbaqian was in a good mood, and was almost humming a tune. Anyway, I'm not alone. Although you guys are a bunch of trash, since Grandpa has spoken, I will reluctantly bring you guys to participate in this lantern-grabbing contest. Just don't drag me down. After thinking for a while, she sighed and said with an aggrieved face, It's impossible for a bunch of good-for-nothings like you to not hold me back. This is my first time participating in the lantern-grabbing contest, and I've already been ruined by you. Friendship comes first, competition comes second. The most important thing is to participate. Renbaqian added. The four Du brothers nodded in unison, like chicks pecking at grains. Tonglan squinted at him and said, That's how a loser comforts himself. If we can get first place, why should we get second place? Renbaqian lowered his head, looked at Tonglan, sighed slightly and said, Until now you still don't know the true meaning of lantern grabbing. Do you think so many people are grabbing lanterns just to decide the champion? Tonglan looked up with a look of disdain. Don't tell me you're going there to make friends. Not entirely, but you are still too young to understand the meaning behind it. I understand very well. Renbaqian continued to speak with a doting expression on his face. Tonglan really wanted to give him a kick. Everyone looked at Renbaqian to see what he had to say. The purpose of this lantern-grabbing activity is to educate the Aboriginal youths through sports without any discrimination, and with the lantern-grabbing spirit, to promote mutual understanding in the spirit of excellence, unity, and fair competition. Thus, to contribute to a peaceful and better world. It could be summarized as peace, friendship, and progress. Du Changkong. Everyone was shocked. They never thought that a lantern-grabbing contest could have such a profound meaning. Renbaqian waved his arms. Our slogan is higher, faster, stronger. Sir Run is still the one who sees things clearly. Peace, friendship, and progress are the objectives of our participation in the lantern-grabbing contest. Higher, faster, and stronger are our watchwords. Du Changkong immediately applauded. Everyone was stunned. Are we talking about the same thing as the two of you? Why did he feel that something was not quite right? Renbaqian didn't care whether they believed him or not. In any case, he had to say it this way. In a while he would discuss with Her Majesty about pasting this motto and slogan all over Lan City. Alright, since everyone is here, let's talk about the arrangements. Tonglan will be the lantern head to snatch the lantern. I will be the tooth door to open the path. And the two from the Tong family, Su Lu and Jiang, who will be the broom on the left and right to protect Tonglan. Du Changkong and the rest of you will be the roaming sentries to prevent the enemy's roaming sentries from approaching and provide support to the broom. Renbaqian said as he clapped his hands. Su Lu and Jiang, who were the two guards in the palace. This was a relatively common arrangement. However, the lantern-grabbing competition was not a football competition. Most of the time, there would be a chaotic battle towards the end. There were only two key players. One was Toothgate, who was in charge of clearing the path for the lantern grabbers. If Toothgate was blocked, the entire team would be hindered. The other was the lamp holder. The lamp holder was placed under the shelf. The main thing to look at was the lamp holder. It was not allowed for the lamp holder to pass through the Toothgate and go to the lampstand alone. One must have the Toothgate or two brooms by their side, otherwise they would be eliminated. Just like on the battlefield. A general couldn't just abandon his army and charge into the enemy's formation alone, right? The rules of the lantern-grabbing competition were also the most basic way to cultivate teamwork and combat habits. As a result, it was often held in the army. It wasn't only held during the new year, but it wasn't usually so grand. In Dayo, the lantern-grabbing competition was equivalent to modern football. The lamp holder was generally the strongest in the team, followed by the toothgate. Everyone didn't have any objections to Tonglan being the lamp holder, but Renbaqian being the toothgate shocked everyone. You are going to be the toothgate? Tonglan widened her eyes in disbelief. Do you want me to carry you, a burden, to the lampstand? Renbaqian waved his hand and said, Don't look down on me. I have already made arrangements. When the time comes, I won't be a burden. No one can stop me. Do you believe this? Tonglan widened her eyes and questioned him. I can't use weapons, but I can wear armor, right? Renbaqian retorted. Even if you wrap yourself up like a turtle, will it be of any use? I will let all of you see what it means to be unstoppable. Renbaqian looked very confident. Although the aboriginals were very powerful, and those who participated in the lantern-grabbing competition weren't mediocre. However, even a tiger wouldn't be able to swallow a hedgehog. Everyone stared at him, wanting to know where this mysterious confidence of his came from. Tonglan puffed up her bun face and said dejectedly, It's over. I can't even get close to the lampstand in my first lantern-grabbing competition. It's so embarrassing. If people bring this up in the future, it will be a dark history. Tomorrow I will get a cloth to cover my face. She learned the term dark history from Renbaqian. Renbaqian looked at her bun face and wanted to pinch it, but he didn't dare to. He reckoned that he would have to participate in the lantern-grabbing competition with a caste. Today is just a meeting. Don't worry too much. Even if we can't win, I won't blame you. Like I said before, friendship comes first, competition comes second. Our goal is to go higher, faster, and stronger. Everyone continued to look at him. It's because of you that we can't win. Otherwise, there might be a little bit of hope. With you around, that little bit of hope is gone. Next, let's meet here at noon on the first day of the Lunar New Year, and participate in the lantern-grabbing competition together. Renbaqian said to them. Everyone nodded except for Tonglan, who was still grumbling unhappily like a chatterbox. However, Renbaqian ignored her. The lantern-grabbing competition usually started at around 7 o'clock in the evening. Usually, people would arrive at around 5 o'clock in advance to participate. Renbaqian arrived 4 hours earlier because he wanted to discuss it again. Even if it was a last-minute preparation, it would still be beneficial. Everyone, see you in 5 days. Renbaqian cupped his hands at everyone, and left on his fork-horned cow with the guards. Tonglan looked at Renbaqian leaving and snorted. In a flash, she landed on the back of the fork-horned cow. Without waiting for the other two people, she rode the fork-horned cow back. After everyone left, Du Chongqing said, It doesn't seem very reliable. It doesn't matter. In any case, we didn't expect to win, Du Chongqing said. Everyone nodded their heads. During the lantern-grabbing competition, there were indeed many capable people. A few outstanding people from the younger generation would participate. After all, this was also an opportunity to showcase the strength of the next generation. Compared to those people, the few of them were indeed not enough. The next day, notices were pasted all over Lan City. Many people surrounded them curiously, waiting for someone to explain what was written on them. The person in the middle had a strange expression on his face as he said, This notice says that this year's lantern-grabbing event is to educate the Aboriginal youths through sports that are free of any discrimination and have the lantern-grabbing spirit. The spirit of excellence, unity, fair competition, and mutual understanding. Thus, they will contribute to a peaceful and better world. In short, peace, friendship, and progress. Not only this year, but this will also be the purpose of future lantern-grabbing competitions. Towards the end, his voice was almost like the buzzing of a mosquito. When he said the first few sentences, the entire place became dead silent. Everyone was dumbfounded. What was he saying? Chapter 289. Half a month before the new year, Renbachian could feel the festive atmosphere everywhere in Lon City. There was a bustling crowd everywhere, and he could always see many aboriginals bringing mountain products into Lon City to exchange for various supplies. Even in the vicinity of Sherhu District and Yuwala District, there were many people sitting by the roadside with a few things they brought out from the mountains in front of them. There were herbs, baby animals, and even rare treasures. As a result, there was a sea of people in the vicinity every day, just like a market. Everyone had a smile on their face. After all, for most people, the new year was the most important time of the year. After hearing about the market, Renbachian made 2 trips to see some strange things in this world. He even bought some small things that he found interesting, such as a green stone. In the dark, he could see small dots emitting white light on it, like stars. For example, there was a plant that bloomed every other day with a flower bud at the top. It bloomed on the first day, closed on the second day, and opened again on the third day. It kept blooming and closing like this, which was very interesting. There was also a kind of animal horn that was said to be able to travel hundreds of kilometers after being blown. However, humans couldn't hear it, and only certain animals could. In contrast to the liveliness in Lon City, the palace was deserted. A palace gate separated the inside and the outside world into 2 different worlds. The Empress didn't seem to care much about the new year. Everything in the palace was going on as usual, and everyone else was doing their own things without any decorations or preparations. After all, the Empress had always been the only person in the palace, and there was no one to talk to or share with. As a result, such a festival had no meaning other than the new year to the Empress. However, there was one more person this year, so it was somewhat different. Your Majesty, why don't we decorate the palace as well? Renbachian suggested when he saw the Empress sitting there watching a television series. When he passed by Beihong District, he saw that many of the mansions of the court officials were being cleaned and decorated. It was a very strange arrangement. Many bones were drilled into holes, tied with a piece of cloth, and hung on the wall. When the wind blew, there would be whimpering sounds and the sound of bones knocking on the wall. The entire Beihong District was filled with a quiet breeze. Every time Renbachian passed by these 2 days, he would shiver and feel that the surrounding air seemed to be a little colder. How was this a festive occasion? It was like a haunted house. Was this done to scare people? He didn't know who was such a genius to actually think of such a creative New Year decoration. However, the people in the mansions all looked happy, which made him feel weird. The Empress gently propped her chin with her finger, looked at him, and said indifferently, "Do what you want." Renbachian bade farewell to the Empress and returned to Earth. When he came back, he brought along 2 big bags filled with colorful LED lights and bells. Now that he had more than 600 gene of strength, he could carry a lot more things at once. It was several times more than before, and he didn't have to be so restricted every time he carried things. He first asked people to make a few wooden frames, and erected them on both sides of Yangxin Palace Hall. He then called for Qingyuan and Hongyuan to get busy in Yangxin Palace Hall. They connected the colorful lanterns in the air, and hung up the bells. Even though the task wasn't complicated, they still had to run from both sides. Out of the 3 of them, 2 of them stood on the racks while Renbachian ran back and forth between the 2 racks with a roll of lanterns. He handed one end of the lanterns to one of the racks, and then pulled it to the other end. The Empress was watching a television series, but she was not in the mood to watch it. From time to time, she would look at the 3 busy people at the bottom of the stairs in a daze. It seemed like it had not been lively for a long time. Or rather, it had never been lively. Yangxin Palace Hall had always been cold and cheerless. Even when she was young and her father was here, it was the same. Even she felt that it should be like this. Therefore, Renbachian's busy schedule made her feel novel, interesting, and warm. The Empress did not realize that she had a smile on her face. It took them half a day to connect the light strips. Renbachian plugged them in, and the colors of the entire Yangxin Palace Hall began to change. From the moment they entered, the 2 sides and the top were covered with light strips, emitting colorful rays of light. Furthermore, the rays of light seemed to be flowing. This kind of light strip only weighed 18 kilograms per 100 meters. Renbachian brought a total of 2,000 meters, and made the entire Yangxin Palace Hall colorful. Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan didn't know what the two of them were doing, but they almost screamed when they saw the scenery. At this moment, Yangxin Palace Hall was no longer cold and cheerless. It was filled with fascinating colors. Even the Empress was pleasantly surprised. She didn't expect that she would be so beautiful and dazzling after finishing it. Not only that, Ren Baqian also got someone to cut down 2 trees and place them near the Empress's bed. He then wrapped the light strips around the trees. Your Majesty, this is the palace that belongs to you. Ren Baqian wiped the perspiration off his forehead. He had been running back and forth while carrying such a heavy lantern belt. It was quite tiring for him. However, looking at the colorful Yangxin Palace Hall, which looked like a palace from a fairy tale, he was very satisfied. The Empress was pleasantly surprised and her heart was filled with tenderness. For a moment, she did not know what to say. After a long time she said softly, "It's very beautiful. I like it very much." Ren Baqian's heart softened when he heard the Empress's gentle voice. This was probably the most romantic thing he had done in his life so far. However, I'm afraid the battery pack is not enough. I brought back another set of batteries. Together with the previous 4 sets of batteries, it can only last for 5 hours. Ren Baqian felt slightly regretful. He felt that it was a pity that such a beautiful scenery couldn't be lit up all the time. Previously, he did not bring too many batteries with him. He prepared a total of 4 sets of batteries to sustain the Empress's use for watching television dramas, table lamps, and charging the walkie-talkie. This time he brought another set of batteries, which made up for only 5 sets. It seemed like he had to bring back a battery with a larger capacity next time. Following which Ren Baqian, Qing Yuan, and Hong Wuan hung countless silver bells on the light strips. As the breeze blew, the entire Yangxin Palace Hall was filled with the melodious sound of the bells. This sound was much better than the ghostly wails and howls of the bone whistles in the air above the residences in Beihang district. Then, the Empress listened to the silver bells for an entire night, and almost couldn't fall asleep. It was really too noisy. She didn't feel it during the day, but it became apparent in the dead of night. However, the Empress still didn't allow anyone to remove the silver bells. The next day, it was as if nothing had happened. Chapter 290. Yesterday, a reader asked in the book review section why it had become 3 stars. I only realized it after that. There were originally just over 100 reviews, but it was directly increased to over 5,000 reviews. I'm Really a Superstar only had a rating of over 2,000, The Cultivation Group only had a rating of over 1,800, and Nanny Dad only had a rating of over 500. My book actually had over 5,000 reviews, which was 10 times more than Nanny Dad and more than twice as much as a superstar. The reviews had been increased to 3 stars. In this world, there were always some people who wanted to drag others down when they couldn't do it themselves. Never underestimate the dark psychology of some people. Maybe they just didn't like you, or for some other reason, they would plot against you. There were many disputes when people became famous, but the problem was that I wasn't famous yet, so why was I in such a hurry to reveal my true colors? So readers who could give reviews, please help me pull the ratings down a little. Tomorrow, I'll see if the editor can delete those reviews that have been increased. Chapter 292. The only activity that Ren Baqian had during his first New Year's in the other world was a hot pot meal at Yangxin Palace Hall. The hot pot base from Earth was combined with natural, unpolluted wild vegetables and fresh meat from the other world. This was the first time the products of the 2 worlds were closely combined. The resulting taste was also unparalleled. Of course, the most important thing was who he was with. The right time and the right person are doing a right thing. For example, at this moment, Ren Baqian was looking at the Empress and giggling foolishly. Just by looking at the focus in his eyes and his body swaying, one could tell that he had drunk too much. The Empress didn't look much different from usual, but her face was slightly flushed. It was obvious that she had drunk quite a bit. The blush on her face made her look even more gorgeous. There were 4 bottles of wine on the ground, 1 for Ren Baqian and 3 for the Empress. However, Ren Baqian disappointingly drank too much. Your Majesty, let me tell you. Coming here and meeting you is probably the best thing I've done in my life. I've used up all the good fortune from my next life in this one, and I've accepted it. Rinpoche's speech was somewhat unclear. However, the Empress didn't mind. She liked to hear these words. I have to thank the heavens. He has arranged so many things in this life, but this is the one that I am most satisfied with. I am truly grateful. I have to burn incense for him, place 3 animals, as well as fruits and vegetables. This is called offering sacrifices to the heavens. Rinpoche continued. Actually, it's almost the same as giving red packets through the back door. They've already done something for you, so you have to pay them back. Otherwise, who would care about you? Right. The same goes for the heavens. The Empress poured herself a cup of wine, and quietly listened to him boasting. Not long after, she downed another bottle of wine. After nagging for a long time, Rinpoche finally got tired. The Empress asked someone to pack up the things while she curled up on the sofa to watch a television series. Out of nowhere, she took out a bag of popcorn. Up until now, Rinpoche didn't know how much food she had saved. In any case, she would curl up on the sofa and eat snacks while watching television series from time to time. The hall was very spacious, and the voice from the laptop echoed in the hall. However, there was another voice in the hall that was very abrupt. Phew, phew. The Empress glanced at him from time to time. Rinpoche sat on the floor, leaned against the sofa, and fell asleep. Send him back to Pingle Park. The Empress waved her hand. Yes. Qing Yuan looked at the computer reluctantly. It was the crucial moment. The Empress curled up on the sofa. She raised her head and looked at the colorful lights above her. She was very satisfied and continued to watch the television series. The next day, Rinpoche woke up with a headache. He asked someone to brew him a cup of green vine powder, and felt much better after drinking it. Today was the first day of the year in this world, and today was the day of the lantern-grabbing event. Looking at the time, it was still a little early. Rinpoche took out 2 boxes from under the bed, opened them, checked them, and then closed the boxes. Rinpoche strolled over to Yangxin Palace Hall to meet the Empress. It was rare for the Empress to wake up late. When Rinpoche arrived, she had just woken up. Her eyes were still groggy and her mental state wasn't very good, which was very rare. Your Majesty, you stayed up late watching TV series again. Rinpoche lamented. The Empress let out a light yawn. The usually domineering Empress now looked like a kitten when she yawned. How's the preparation for the lantern-grabbing event going? The Empress asked casually. Wait and see my heroic performance. Rinpoche gave her a thumbs up. Even his teeth were shining. It gave off a sense of Mike McKay. After hearing what he said, the Empress became a little more spirited. She looked at Rinpoche, who was full of confidence, and finally shook her head. As long as he wasn't too miserable, it was fine. The Empress already knew who was in Rinpoche's team, and how they were arranged. Regarding the matter of Rinpoche being a toothpick, the Empress had reservations. In her heart, it was fine as long as she could put on airs. After lunch, Rinpoche returned to Pingle Park. First, he put on a set of tight-fitting clothes. That set of armor could only be worn by the tight-fitting clothes. Then he put on a robe. Before he could even move, he felt unbearably hot. During winter in Lan City, the temperature was at least 23 or 24 degrees Celsius. Usually he could barely wear a robe, but with the tights he would be sweating. However, when the time came, he couldn't possibly run around naked and change his attire. After all, the sorceress still had the holy light, and he would be an infantryman without a horse. After getting someone to hang the 2 boxes on the back of the fork-horned cow, Rinpoche brought his men to the training field outside the palace. He and the Du brothers were right behind each other. The Du brothers were wearing animal skin underpants, and their upper bodies were also made of animal skin. From their left shoulder to their right waist, the right half of their body was filled with bulging muscles. Thick blue veins and blood vessels crossed the surface of their muscles, making them look like dragons. Just by looking at their appearance, Rinpoche gave them a score of 9. If he gave them a score less, they would become arrogant. However, when he thought about how they couldn't even defeat a little Lolita, Rinpoche felt that they were really too useless. Then the 5 of them squatted down in a corner. It was cooler here. Who's going to buy a bowl of shaved ice? Su Wei, find someone to buy a few bowls of shaved ice. Don't collapse before the competition starts, Renbaqian shouted at the top of his lungs. In fact, he was the only one sweating profusely. After a few months, shaved ice had become a relatively common sight in Lan City. It was rare for caretaker Shi to have a business acumen. He opened 10 stores in one go and had shaved ice in almost every district. After a while, Renbaqian and the others squatted down in a row in a corner and ate shaved ice intermittently. After waiting for a full hour, Tong Lan finally arrived. She was accompanied by 2 other young men from the Tong family. One was called Tong Taiho, and the other was called Tong Taichung. These 2 followed Tong Lan's lead. One look and anyone could tell that they were 2 good-for-nothings. Tong Lan stood on the back of the bull. Her white satin clothes fluttered in the wind. In addition to her good looks, she really looked like a fairy. Why do you always stand on the back of the bull? Renbaqian was curious. Tong Lan looked at Renbaqian as if he was a piece of trash and ignored him. Is it because you are shorter when you sit on the back of the bull? Or is it because you look more high-end and classy when you stand on the back of the bull? Renbaqian irresponsibly guessed. Humph. Tong Lan looked up and continued to ignore him. Tong Taiho and Tong Taichung gave Renbaqian a thumbs up. Renbaqian's eyes widened. Was this really the reason? Sure enough, no matter what kind of Lolita she looked like, she would have a chinibyu period. Especially for someone as strong as Tong Lan. Do you want to play Gamoku? Renbaqian waved his hand. What's Gamoku? The little Lolita immediately revealed a curious look. After all, she was a little girl and was full of curiosity. Come like this. Renbaqian drew a Gamoku board on the ground and taught everyone how to play. Gamoku was very easy to learn. Even the aboriginals could easily learn it with their IQ. After a short while, Renbaqian and the little Lolita were playing Gamoku with a group of onlookers. Childish. Tong Lan, who had lost 10 games in a row, had a face full of contempt. You are already so old, yet you still play such a childish game. No wonder you are so useless. Sarun, why are we here so early today? Du Chongkong touched the back of his head, and finally remembered something. Didn't they agree to discuss the tactics for tonight? Why were they playing Gamoku in the afternoon? When the time comes, both of us will rush forward and you guys will cover us, Renbaqian casually said. With our strength and my meticulous preparation, if we don't crush them, we will be crushed. I have thought for a few days and feel that there is no need to make any arrangements. Everyone will improvise on the spot. Everyone looked at him from the corner of their eyes. They would definitely be crushed. Chapter 293. The lantern-grabbing contest had a long history in Dayo. In the past, it was often held by 2 or 3 villages in the 60,000 mountains. After the establishment of Dayo, many aboriginal commoners came down from the mountains to live in the city. As the population grew, the scale of the lantern-grabbing contest increased. This was especially true for Lan City, the capital of Dayo. The lantern-grabbing contest on the first day of the new year was considered the most eye-catching event in the whole of Dayo. In the afternoon, people from the nearby mountains started to arrive at Lan City, one after another. Almost all of them set off in the morning, and stayed in the city overnight just to witness this grand event. Even though the residents of Lan City would participate every year, they wouldn't miss out on the biggest event of the year. Even the merchants and envoys from other countries in Lan City would be watching from the side. Of course, there were no seats, the kind that squeezed together with civilians. Regardless of whether it was the Empress or the people in the imperial court, from top to bottom, no one cared about what the envoys from the other nations thought. In fact, among the envoys from the 3 countries, only Great Xiao's Gu Zicheng was slightly valued. It wasn't because Great Xiao was the most powerful. It was because Gu Zicheng had lived the longest. Gu Zicheng had been safe and sound in Lan City for more than 10 years, and it wasn't just because he kept a low profile. Perhaps even the person who sent him here didn't expect him to live this long. One had to know that Dayo's envoys didn't just have to stay in Lan City for a while. They had to step in when the caravans of their respective nations met with mishaps in Lan City. They also had to step in when other nations had issues that involved Dayo. If they were not careful, they would lose their heads. At most, the Empress would just find an excuse to dismiss them. If they didn't handle this matter properly and lost face for their country, they wouldn't be able to get any benefits either. It would even affect their families. Basically, a diplomatic mission to Dayo was equivalent to having one foot in the gates of hell. For example, the envoy from the Rising Cloud Nation had been beheaded within a year of his mission. It had only been a month since the new envoy arrived. Gu Zicheng's ability to stay in Lan City for more than a decade was admirable. It was all thanks to Gu Zicheng's talent and resourcefulness. Even Shiqing was puzzled as to why Great Xia had left such a talent in Dayo for more than 10 years. Could it be that Great Xia really had so many talents? Gu Zicheng was sitting in the carriage. When the carriage rolled over the stone slabs, the inside of the carriage would be a little bumpy. Listening to the noise outside, Gu Zicheng's expression was a little gloomy. He already knew about the seventh prince's death. He had also found out about Great Xia's current preparations through some channels. He didn't know if he would be buried here in the end. Thinking about it, more than 10 years had passed, and the people in his hometown had changed. It seemed that being buried here was not that bad. Or should he seek refuge with Dayo? This idea popped up in Gu Zicheng's mind, but he immediately suppressed it. Because he still had the Gu family behind him. When he arrived, it was not too late. Previously, some guards had already come to take up space. Next to him were the new envoys from the Yun nation and the Chen nation. The three of them could be considered brothers in hardship. At this time, Gu Zicheng's face had already regained its tranquil smile. He nodded lightly at the two of them as a greeting. Their seats weren't too bad. On one side was the Aboriginal official's seat, and on the other side was a sea of human heads. In front of them was a huge empty field surrounded by grass ropes. The field was 4,000 feet long and 700 feet wide. In the middle was a huge wooden frame. It was 20 feet wide and 8 feet tall. It was divided into 7 levels, each smaller than the previous one. The top level was only 20 feet wide. This entire frame was called the lampstand. On that level, there was a square platform with a red lantern on it. The winner would be the one who obtained the lantern within the specified time. In this lantern-grabbing contest, only one team would be the winner, and the rest would be the losers. There was no second or third place. On both sides of the lantern platform, there were 26 teams, 13 teams on each side. Both teams were the same distance away from the lantern platform, which was about 6,000 feet. 18 of the teams were formed by the descendants of officials, while the other 8 were formed by commoners. In the 70 years since the founding of Dayo, commoners had only obtained the lantern 10 times. 2 or 3 of these times, the descendants of officials had suffered losses on both sides. The remaining few times were the dark horses. The most recent one was 6 years ago. Rin Baqian recognized one of the dark horses in that team, the simple-minded Xiong Pai. Almost all the others had been recruited into the army. The dark horses that appeared in every lantern-grabbing contest attracted the most attention. Every time, they would be discussed enthusiastically for a long time. Many people wanted to see if there were any dark horses this year. Even if they didn't obtain the lantern in the end, if they performed well, they would still be respected. Moreover, the Empress and the court officials would also be watching. Because of these reasons, the lantern-grabbing contest was the biggest stage for the Aboriginals. It wasn't only the commoners, but also the descendants of officials. They wanted to show off, let the elders in their families value them more, or win honor for their families. The waiting area for the participants was relatively quiet. Even those who were more ambitious were conserving their energy. After all, even Hong Xian and Shi Yuya, who were relatively famous in this generation, weren't strong enough to suppress the others. Furthermore, there were a few opponents who were of similar strength. Needless to say, most of the others were still a little nervous. However, there were also exceptions. For example, there were a few people who were surrounding the city. Among them, they could still make sounds like, I jump, I jump, I jump again. This caused the people who weren't far away to stretch their necks to see what these people were doing. Childish. Tong Lan had a look of disdain on her face. You're already so old. Yet you're still playing such a childish game. Useless. After she finished speaking, she snorted, turned around, and left with her head held high. Rinpochian looked at the grids and small wooden blocks on the ground and sighed. This little lass was getting harder and harder to deceive. She stopped playing Gamoku after losing 10 games in the afternoon. This time around, she stopped playing Chinese checkers after losing 9 games. Du Chongkong, who was at the side, was cheerfully accompanying her. In any case, it didn't matter if he lost. The most important thing was to participate. Rinpochian threw the small wooden block in his hand to one side, got up, and looked into the distance. Behind the torches in the distance, there was a dense mass of people. There was also a very loud noise coming from that direction. It made people wonder if more than half of the people in Lan City were here. The waiting area wasn't partitioned. In fact, it was a large piece of open space outside the city that was temporarily roped off. 2 teams were separated by a rope, and the surrounding people could see it clearly. For example, the team beside him consisted of 10 women. Hong Xian was the leader of the team. Among them, there was a person who was sneering at him. Wasn't that Lu Ruiyao, whom he had verbally refuted to the point where she doubted her life? He didn't know if he should say that enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road, or if someone had deliberately arranged this. Wasn't this just looking for trouble? He couldn't possibly hit a woman, right? Even though Aboriginal women were very valiant, they were still women. After thinking about it, Rinpochian decided not to hit them. If he really couldn't get over it, he would at most gently push them aside a little. Other than Hong Xian and Lu Ruiyao, there were 8 other young ladies. They all had different appearances, but they all had hot bodies. They frequently sized up Rinpochian. This person actually dared to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest. Even though he was slightly stronger than the rumors said, it was still negligible. They didn't know whether to say that he was bold, or that he didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Yaozi would probably teach him a lesson later. On the other side, Rinpochian didn't recognize any of them. However, he heard from Du Chongkong that the rest of the people in that team were alright, but there were 2 people who were only slightly weaker than Hong Xian. One of them was called Qin Haoyong, and the other was Qin Kuan. The former was the youngest son of the Minister of War, Qin Chuan, and the latter was his grandson. Rinpochian carefully sized them up and couldn't help but sigh. Qin Chuan was also a talent. However, the others didn't think much of it. After all, the Aboriginals had a relatively long lifespan, especially the strong ones. It wasn't rare for a family of 5 or 6 generations to live under the same roof. 2 people who looked about the same age might actually have a difference of 2 generations. Qin Haoyong seemed to have sensed Rinpochian's gaze. He turned around and nodded his head in a friendly manner. Rinpochian was slightly astonished. After all, he was the first person with such strength to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest. Rinpochian nodded his head as well. Then he turned around and asked Du Chongkong, "How much longer do we have?" "Less than the time it takes for an incense stick to burn." Du Chongkong looked in another direction and replied, "Less than the time it takes for an incense stick to burn." That was about 20 minutes. Rinpochian felt that he could start preparing now. After all, he still needed some time to put on that set of armor. Rinpochian placed the 2 boxes side by side and said to the others, "Come over and surround me. Help me block them." He felt that after preparing for so long, it was necessary for him to give the others a surprise. Therefore, he could only reveal it at the last moment. The others were puzzled and surrounded him. With 8 burly men surrounding him, they basically couldn't see anything from the outside. Only then did Rinpochian laugh mischievously as he took off his robe, revealing the tight-fitting clothes underneath. Following which, he opened the box at his feet. Everyone had been curious about what was inside the box. They reckoned that it was what he relied on to be the tooth gate. However, no matter how hard they racked their brains, they couldn't figure out what was inside. One had to know that no matter what kind of weapon it was forbidden to use it. Apart from the weapon, whatever was inside the box wouldn't be of much use. However, when the group of people saw what Rinpochian took out, they immediately gasped. Only then did they realize that they were still too naive. Everyone was dumbfounded. Sir Ren, will this really work? Isn't this against the rules? Of course it will work. Renbaqian replied confidently. This was armor, right? Since it was armor, there was nothing wrong with it. In any case, the rules didn't say that it wasn't allowed. As for whether the rules would allow it in the future, it was none of his business. What's that? Let me see. Let me see. Not long after the little Lolita left in a huff, she saw this group of people gathering together mysteriously and making such noises. She couldn't help but squeeze her way through the crowd. Wastrel, what's that? Once the little Lolita saw what Renbaqian was wearing, she widened her eyes and exclaimed. Tonglan's voice attracted the attention of the two teams at the side. However, a row of burly men blocked their view, so they couldn't see anything. It doesn't matter what tricks they have up their sleeves. Lu Ruoyao sneered. At the lantern-grabbing contest, only strength mattered. Other than that, other tricks were just for the sake of making others laugh. Although her parents had already warned her, she was still determined to teach Renbaqian a lesson later. At most, she wouldn't be so obvious. Hong Xian sat quietly at one side. She paused for a moment as her gaze swept across Tonglan's body. After thinking about it, she swallowed the words she wanted to say. Lower your voice. Renbaqian raised his index finger to warn Tonglan before continuing to wear the box. Looking at Renbaqian like a porcupine, the little Lolita rolled her eyes a few times before curling up. She covered her mouth with one hand and snickered. This was really too fun. The expressions of those people would definitely be very interesting. As for whether it was against the rules or not, she didn't care as long as it was fun. At the side of the lantern stand, the Empress was sitting on a chair. Behind her were Xianjia, Qing Yuan and Hong Wan. This was the best position to have a clear view of both the left and right sides. On both sides of her sat the civil and military officials of the imperial court. Behind them were some family members. Your Majesty, will anything happen to Deputy Prefect Run for participating in this lantern-grabbing contest? Shi Qing asked rather worriedly. He wasn't afraid of anything else, but he was afraid that something would really happen to that person. At that time, it wasn't impossible for the Empress to strike. However, if the Empress really did that, the lantern-grabbing contest would be in chaos. We will know in a while, the Empress casually said, but she was feeling somewhat uncertain. At that time, she only wanted to see Renbaqian do this for her, and didn't think too much about it. However, as the time was getting closer and closer, she started to worry. Thinking of that fellow's confident look, the Empress felt slightly relieved. She hoped that he really had some confidence. At this moment, the Empress was feeling somewhat conflicted. On one hand, Renbaqian was really too weak. On the other hand, there were all kinds of things in that world that seemed to be able to do anything. She hoped that Renbaqian could rely on some things to really impress people. Not far away, Tong Jinye was more confident. Previously, he had already instructed Tong Lan to protect Renbaqian no matter what. Everything else didn't matter. Therefore, he wasn't worried at all. Chapter 294. From time to time, Qin Haoyong would glance at the group of people who were gathered together. He could always hear people covering their mouths and laughing. This made him very puzzled. What exactly was going on inside? He was also very curious about how that person had the guts to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest. Even without his father's instructions, he wouldn't take the initiative to fight with that person. In any case, that person wouldn't be able to win. If that person was in trouble, he might be able to help him and gain a favor. On the other side, Lu Ruoyao looked at the tiny spot of light at the bottom of the incense burner, and felt increasingly carefree. She would be able to feel carefree after she had her revenge. He made her lose so much face and was even punished. She couldn't let him have it easy. As for the teams in the distance, they didn't pay much attention to this side. Although many people had already discovered Renbaqian and Tong Lan, it was easy to recognize a rookie and a Lolita. These children of officials were also well informed, but most people didn't see them as opponents. They had to get past Lu Ruoyao and Hong Xian first. Everyone knew what Lu Ruoyao was thinking. Although they heard that the lass from the Tong family was talented, She was too young and her teammates were too weak. She wouldn't be able to accomplish anything by herself. Sir Run, it's about to start, Du Changkong reminded him. Oh, Rinpochian replied. His voice sounded a little muffled from under his helmet. At this moment, Rinpochian had completely transformed into a human-shaped hedgehog. His entire body, including his face, was covered with a layer of soft iron armor. The surface of the armor was densely packed with sharp spikes. Furthermore, the gaps between two spikes were extremely small. At most, a finger could fit through the gap between two spikes. All the spikes were 1 inch long, and were enough to pierce through a person's palm. The tip of the spikes was ghastly cold. Needless to say, there were barbs at the tip of each spike. If these spikes were to collide with a person's body, it was guaranteed that the other party would be pierced like a sieve. When the spikes were separated, they would even leave a piece of flesh behind. This was the legendary artifact for squeezing people on the subway, the 17th century Siberian bear hunting suit, Rinpochian's ultimate trump card, the enhanced version of the human-shaped hedgehog suit. The first point of this suit was that it was breathable. There were countless small holes on the soft iron armor to ensure a certain degree of breathability. Furthermore, there was a layer of soft lining inside, which made wearing it less uncomfortable. Secondly, all the spikes were made of alloy to ensure their sharpness and hardness. At the same time, their weight was reduced. Finally, this set of equipment came with a trump card. However, that trump card was not only useful to others, but also to oneself. It could be said that to kill 1,000 enemies, it would damage oneself by 1,500. Unless it was absolutely necessary, it must not be used. The only weaknesses of this set of hedgehog gloves were probably the throat, armpits, and inner thighs. However, these weaknesses did not reduce the lethality of this set of equipment. Rinpochian had high hopes for this suit. After wearing it, he felt that his whole body was brimming with power. Transforming into the porcupine silver Saint Seiya, he would be able to create a bloody path in front of him, be it a mountain of knives or a sea of fire. My body is already unbearably hungry and thirsty, Rinpochian said loftily. Everyone else was speechless. Why did that sound so strange? Loser, I want this too. The little Loli's eyes were bright and full of vigor, and her face was full of envy. If we win this time, I will give this to you, Rinpochian said generously. Little Loli immediately looked at him with disdain. You didn't want to send me off at all. Sir, it's about to begin, Suel reminded. At this moment, there was already someone standing in the middle with a flag in his hand. When the small flag in his hand landed, the lantern-grabbing contest officially began. Everyone's spirits were lifted. Get out of my way later. Don't block the way. Rinpochian warned Du Changkong and Du Changqing, who were in front of him. The two of them nodded and cursed silently. Only fools would block in front of him. It was fine if they bumped into someone else, but if they bumped into him, they would definitely be unlucky. Even though the bodies of the aboriginals were tough, they weren't invulnerable. The barbed spikes on his body looked like they were not to be trifled with. However, could it be that he would be kicked out of the competition the moment he rushed out? This was basically against the rules, right? Everyone's eyes were on the small flag that was being raised. The last few seconds seemed to be especially slow. The surrounding audience was also attentively watching the performances of this year's participating teams. At the same time, they could also meet many young experts. Rinpochian was still completely blocked. He moved his body slightly to see if there was anything wrong with it. Meanwhile, the little Loli was still staring at Rinpochian with shining eyes. Begin. The small flag in the hands of the person in the middle of the arena turned into green smoke, and suddenly fell to the ground. There were no other superfluous words. As the word begin, and the small flag fell to the ground, 26 teams, consisting of more than 200 silhouettes, rushed out from the waiting area. At the same time, they looked at the teams on both sides with vigilance. Haha, my big axe is thirsty. A shout suddenly came from the crowd. Qin Haoyong's eyes lit up. These words were good and he had to remember them. Lu Ruoyao had a look of disdain on her face. How dare you say such words? I will not let you touch the lampstand today. As Du Changkong and Du Changqing dodged aside, A slightly clumsy figure rushed out from within. What were they doing so mysteriously just now? I can finally see it. Qin Haoyong had been curious for a long time. He wasn't in a hurry to rush out and instead looked to the side. The next moment, he saw the figure that rushed out. His eyes widened and he staggered, almost falling to the ground. What's that? Qin Haoyong's mind was filled with question marks. The 4 scouts from the Hong Xian team simply didn't care about the other team and directly approached Ren Baqian's team. Among them was Lu Ruoyao. When she saw the figure that rushed out from the crowd, she suddenly felt a tightness in her chest and almost spat out a mouthful of blood. This is against the rules. Lu Ruoyao shouted angrily. After the Empress started, she immediately looked over there. When she saw the figure that rushed out from the crowd, she almost choked. The corners of her eyes twitched nonstop. Previously, she was wondering where this guy got his confidence from, but she didn't expect him to actually be like this. Pfft. Tong Jingye immediately spat out a mouthful of tea. He stretched out his trembling hand and pointed in that direction with a shocked look on his face. Although I already know that you are shameless, I didn't expect you to be so shameless. Qin Chuan was even more dumbstruck. What is that thing? After Tong Jingye spat out his tea, the others also looked in the direction he was pointing at. They saw a large hedgehog with spikes all over its body that reflected a cold glint. It dashed wildly all the way and everyone was horrified. How could it be played like this? Everyone felt that today was really an eye-opener. Shi Qing had been an official for so many years. What hadn't he seen before? However, this was the first time he saw something like this at the lantern-grabbing contest. At first he was dumbfounded. Then he turned to the Empress uncertainly and asked, "Your Majesty, isn't this against the rules?" The corners of the Empress's eyes twitched for a long time. After hearing Shi Qing's words, she said in a deep voice, "If it's armor, it doesn't seem to be against the rules." "But this?" Shi Qing pointed at the center of the field. "Is this armor? If it was anywhere else, it would be fine. As long as one had a weapon, that armor would be a joke. But now there were more than 200 people in the field who were unarmed. Suddenly, a large hedgehog appeared. What could the others do? In the future, we will add another rule. Armor must not have sharp ornaments to avoid hurting others. However, since there are no previous rules, those who don't know are not guilty," the Empress said casually. Tong Jingye, who was at the side, opened and closed his mouth for a long time like a catfish that had come ashore. After a long time, he looked at the Empress from the corner of his eyes with a hidden bitterness. "Your Majesty, you have changed." Chapter 295. When Ren Baqian saw Du Chongkong and Du Chongkong stepping aside, he dashed toward the lampstand without saying a word. He did not care about anything else. He knew in his heart that he was the weakest in the entire field. Even if there were 10 of him, he might not be able to defeat the second weakest person from the bottom. Since that was the case, he might as well run. At the same time, he was laughing wildly in his heart. "Why don't you guys stop me? Why don't you guys stop me? Try touching me." Ren Baqian was indeed the fastest. After running for a few dozen meters, he had completely surpassed the rest. In the distance, some people had already started to fight. However, more people looked at the figure that ran the fastest. They were all dumbfounded. What the hell was that? Was that even possible? Wasn't that a clear violation of the rules? More than half of the 100 people were looking at him. Should he stop them? How could they stop him? Everyone looked at each other, and finally turned their heads to look at the side of the field. Lu Ruoyao stomped her feet and shouted, "Foul! Foul!" He broke the rules. Even the contestants in the field had such a reaction, let alone the surrounding spectators. Such a large porcupine with a cold glint was running at the very front. Those who were slightly stronger could see it clearly and were in an uproar. Gu Chongkong didn't notice it at first, but when he noticed the movement of the person next to him and looked in the same direction, he almost choked. There was actually such a talent in the Gu clan? But soon he remembered something he had heard recently. Could it be that person? Other than him, there should be no one else. After staying in Dayo for more than 10 years, he was very familiar with the temperament of the Aboriginals. There shouldn't be anyone who would come up with such a bizarre method. The Empress saw that there were still a few contestants in the arena who were looking at Renbaqian in a daze. She turned her head and glanced at Tang Xinye. Tang Xinye coughed with a look of hidden bitterness, and his voice resounded throughout the arena. It's not a violation of the rules. The match will proceed as normal. The Empress nodded slightly to express her satisfaction. However, when these words reached the ears of the crowd, it was unknown how many people understood for the first time what shady dealings meant. Especially the children of the officials present. They were so depressed that they wanted to vomit blood. This was definitely shady business. You can't play it like this. Lu Ruoyao, who was still shouting foul, was almost angered to death when she heard this. Finally, he appeared in front of Renbaqian with a furious look on his face. However, Renbaqian lowered his head and directly rammed into it. He was still shouting, "I can't stop, someone pull me." The little loli behind him had a look of contempt on her face. Do you dare to act more realistically? And what are your short legs doing there? Just like a wheel. Lu Ruoyao saw a bunch of sharp thorns flashing with a cold light heading toward her. After hearing Renbaqian's words, she became even angrier. However, she really didn't dare to not dodge. She didn't want to test whether these sharp thorns could pierce through her or not. She dodged in a flash. Her heart was so sullen that she wanted to vomit blood. Previously, he was prepared to prevent him from even touching the lampstand, but now, he couldn't even stop him. However, the other two women in Hong Xian's group stopped Suel and Jiang Hu. Lu Ruoyao gritted her teeth and followed behind, looking for an opportunity, especially when the little Lolita smiled at her when she passed by. Du Chongkong and the rest also had a relaxed expression on their faces. Among them, their team was the most relaxed. Many people from the other teams had already started to fight. Even so, as the others began to accelerate, Renbaqian began to fall from first place. After all, compared to the others, his speed was really too slow. At the side, bang, bang. The sound of banging could be heard incessantly. Many people were punching and kicking each other while running. From time to time, someone couldn't dodge in time, and was sent flying by another person's kick. There were also people who were grabbed by the arm and thrown out. That hedgehog, be careful. Suddenly someone shouted. A person drew an arc and flew in Renbaqian's direction, baring his fangs and brandishing his claws. He adjusted his body a few times in the air, but his direction didn't change. If they collided, even the best outcome would be Renbaqian being sent flying with the soles of his feet pierced into a sieve. He was the one who had yelled out earlier. When the little Lolita heard this, she couldn't help but burst out laughing. Renbaqian's current appearance was no different from a hedgehog, the kind that couldn't be eaten. The Aboriginals' cultivation was divided into four-way heaven, Kismet heaven, Cardinal heaven, and Longevity heaven. The commoners could basically enter four-way heaven, while the people present were at Kismet heaven. After all, it was already considered good to be able to reach Kismet heaven at this age. This level of strength couldn't withstand the spikes on Renbaqian's body. As a result, even though Renbaqian was like an ant in the eyes of the crowd, no one was willing to take the risk of being pierced into a sieve to stop him. Even Lu Ruoyao wasn't willing to take the risk of being pierced into a sieve and attack Renbaqian. Should you hit him lightly or heavily? If you hit him lightly, you would suffer a huge loss, but if you hit him hard, don't forget Renbaqian's status. Even Lu Ruoyao, who hated Renbaqian so much, at most wanted to stop him and embarrass him. At most, he would only suffer a small injury. If she were to seriously injure him, she would have to be crazy to do it. The Empress wouldn't let her off. As a result, she was on the verge of vomiting blood, but there was nothing she could do. This was even more so for the others. However, that person's shout was really too funny. Big hedgehog? Ha ha ha. The little Lolita laughed heartily. Renbaqian raised his middle finger at that person as he ran. At the same time, he was calculating in his mind. If he didn't change his speed, he would bump into that person. Should he bump into him or not? At this moment, Du Chongkong suddenly appeared in front of Renbaqian. He stomped on the ground, soared into the sky, and threw a punch at the person in the sky. In any case, everyone in the arena was an opponent, except for his own side. That person wasn't afraid at all. At the same time, he threw out countless punches and collided with Du Chongkong. After a few collisions, that person was punched in the chest and flew out. Du Chongkong was also smashed back to the ground. Both of his feet landed on the ground and created two pits that reached his calves. Rinpochian was about 60 to 70 meters away from the lampstand, but the others started later than him. They were still in a daze for a while, but they had already reached the lampstand. It was like a tractor racing against a Ferrari for 600 meters. Even if the tractor ran 300 meters first, it would still end up with the exhaust. More than 10 people rose from the ground and leaped up to the second level. Two of them exchanged kicks in midair. One of them crashed into the supporting pillar, while the other was kicked off the stage. However, the person who crashed into the supporting pillar was pushed off the stage by Qin Haoyong. Qin Haoyong then leaped up to the third level. Other than those who leaped onto the stage, some people immediately turned around and blocked the way of the other teams behind them. Rinpochian didn't care about them. He dashed forward with his body covered in spikes and shouted, "If the gods block us, we shall destroy the gods. If the Buddhas block us, we shall destroy the Buddhas. Those who block us shall die, and those who give way shall live." The others raised their eyebrows and made way for him. There was really no way to block the barbed spikes on this guy's body. However, with his speed, the outcome of the battle was decided before he could even climb halfway. The little Lolita, Tonglan, followed closely behind Rinpochian and dashed forward. However, the others were all blocked and fell into a chaotic battle. At this moment, there were 30 to 40 people fighting on both sides of the lampstand. From time to time, someone would be kicked off. The area below the lampstand was even more chaotic. Other than those on the stage, half of the remaining people were fighting on the road, and the other half were here. Phew! Rinpochian collapsed below the lampstand to catch his breath. This enhanced hedgehog suit had indeed lived up to his expectations. After safely sending him here, there shouldn't be much left for him to do. However, since he had nothing better to do, he might as well climb up. It would also look good on his face. The little Lolita didn't care about him anymore and leaped up to the second level. Before she landed on the ground, she saw another person in front of her. That person let out a cry of surprise as if he was surprised that there was such a young contestant. His movements weren't slow at all. His right hand transformed into a broadsword and slashed down. Tonglan pressed on his arm with one hand, flipped her body in the air, and sent a downward kick toward the top of her opponent's head. Her opponent only took half a step back, which was just out of Tonglan's reach. Then he slashed with his palm again. Tonglan's eyes widened. "Are you bullying me because my legs aren't as long as your arms?" Her legs danced in the air like a windmill. She kicked her opponent 7 times in a row, forcing him to take a few steps back. Tonglan borrowed the force to land on the second level of the lampstand. She then leaped into the air and pounced toward her opponent. Within a few rounds, she had kicked her opponent off the stage. Meanwhile, Rinpochian was still climbing from the first level to the second level. After all, he was weak to begin with. Coupled with the fact that he was wearing armor, it was inconvenient for him to move. Previously, it was still fine for him to run, but now it was troublesome for him to climb to the second level. After all, there weren't any ladders on this lampstand. Everyone just leaped up. If it weren't for the rule that they had to climb up one level at a time, many people would be able to jump up 2 or 3 levels with a single leap. Rinpochian didn't have this ability. He could only climb up the supporting pillar. At the same time, he had to be careful of the spikes on his body piercing the pillar. Lu Ruoya watched from behind as Rinpochian climbed up the pillar like a large hedgehog. She felt suffocated. She took off her shoe and threw it at Rinpochian. The shoe wasn't considered heavy, but with the strength of her hand, it smashed into Rinpochian's back like a brick. This attack to vent her anger had resulted in 2 consequences that she hadn't even thought of before. First, the shoe was completely penetrated by the spikes on Rinpochian's back and couldn't be removed. Second, this force directly slammed Rinpochian against the pillar. The spikes on his chest all pierced into the pillar, and it was as if his whole body was nailed to the pillar. Rinpochian felt something hit his back, and his whole body was directly pressed against the pillar. He could even hear the sound of the spikes on his body piercing into the pillar. What the F***ck? Renbachian's eyes widened. He used all his strength to push the pillar, but the spikes, which were supposed to be used as a deterrent, were now hooked onto the fibers of the pillar and couldn't be pulled out. Many spectators in the distance saw this scene and immediately burst into laughter. Many people immediately gloated and laughed out loud. The corner of the Empress's eyes twitched again. Not only her, but Shiqing, Kozhihai, Tongzhinya, and Qin Chuan were also twitching. At present, the fastest person had already reached the 4th level. However, a few people were fighting and blocking each other, and no one could get away from the 5th level. Originally, everyone was looking at the few people at the top, but they didn't expect such a scene to happen below. That hedgehog was actually slammed against the pillar by a shoe that flew out from the crowd. This happened too suddenly and was too unexpected. For a moment, everyone didn't know whether to laugh or spit out their mouths. Renbachian was hung on the pillar for a long time. He gritted his teeth and spent a lot of effort to pull the spikes off his body. The effect of Lu Ruoyao's flying shoe was somewhat beyond her expectations. Subsequently, she felt a surge of pleasure in her heart. At the same time, her eyes lit up. While fighting with the others, she paid attention to Renbachian and was ready to throw the other shoe at him at any time. At this moment, she saw Renbachian's body moving as if he had pulled himself out, so she was ready to throw the other shoe at him. In the end, before she could move, another shoe flew out from the crowd and hung on Renbachian's back, slamming him against the pillar again. F***ck. Renbachian was extremely furious as he hung on the pillar. Which bastard hit him? This time, the people below were no longer in the mood to fight, and their movements also slowed down as if they were moving in slow motion. Each and every one of them looked at the big hedgehog on the pillar. This guy was really too hateful. He had broken the tradition of the lantern-grabbing contest that had lasted for so many years. Among the group of unarmed Aboriginal youths, there was such a strange person. A big hedgehog with a cold glint all over its body. Yet he was recognized. How could this make the others feel at ease? Chapter 296. Damn it, Renbachian cursed, took off his helmet, and sat on the ground. There were shoes everywhere. If it wasn't for Su Lu, Jiang Hu, and the Du Chongkong brothers who rushed over to protect him, he would have been drowned in shoes today. The shoes on the ground were proof of that. Have you recorded the name list? Renbachian gritted his teeth and asked Du Chongkong. Sir, other than the ones on the lampstand, almost everyone on our side has thrown their shoes. Du Chongkong held back his laughter. This was the first time he saw over 100 people throwing shoes at each other, and it was rather spectacular. Give me the name list tomorrow. I'll get someone to get it. Renbachian couldn't help but say. So what if there are more people? Can they throw shoes at others just because there are more people? I'll find a chance to make things difficult for them. But was he that hated? In fact, only Lu Ruyao hated him. The second one just felt that it was fun. When the others saw this, they felt that it was fun. In the end, no one was in the mood to continue fighting. Even the people on the other side of the shelf would come over to take a look. It could be said that this year's lantern-grabbing contest was the most relaxing one in the past years. Everyone was laughing so hard that the audience outside was laughing so hard. Even the Empress couldn't help but laugh. Renbachian felt that he had lost face this time. He was actually kicked by someone on the pillar. Even Tonglan gloated when she saw him off the stage after the contest. I don't want that thing of yours anymore. Thinking about how many shoes were hanging on her back, she felt like dying. The lantern-grabbing contest was over. The winner was a lady called Jiang Ningyun. She wasn't famous previously, but she wasn't weak. She was almost on par with Hong Xian, and with some luck, she managed to snatch the lantern. Get someone to wrap up these shoes for me. I want to bring them back. Renbachian wanted to get up and take off his armor, but sadly he realized that the spike under his buttocks was stuck somewhere. He almost couldn't get up. When he got up, there was another piece of rotten wood under his buttocks. It was hilarious, and Tonglan laughed for a long time. After he changed his clothes, he saw that only Su Wei, Su Lu, Jiang Hu, and many guards were waiting for him. The rest had already dispersed. For example, the Empress and the officials in the imperial court had already left. Now almost all the roads into the city were blocked. Everyone took a detour before entering the city, through another gate. As soon as Renbachian returned to the palace, he went straight to Pingle Park. He had lost a lot of face today. It was better for him to go back and soothe the trauma in his heart. Early in the morning the next day, Renbachian rushed over to Du Changkong's house and forced him to write down the name list. Renbachian received the name list, and only saw 2 lines of it. He exclaimed in surprise. One of the names on the list seemed familiar. Shirgan. This is the great elder's youngest son, right? She seems to be 13 years old this year? Renbachian asked. Yes, he was the second one who threw a shoe at Sir. Du Changkong added. Humph. Renbachian sneered incessantly. This fellow really didn't know how he was going to die. There was a good saying. Heaven's wrongs can be forgiven, but one's own wrongs cannot be forgiven. In a few days, when the school reopens, I'll let him know why flowers are so red. There was also Tong Lan. Renbachian carefully looked at the name list that Du Changkong had written. There wasn't anyone on it who was going to enter the academy. But it didn't matter. Sooner or later, he would find an opportunity to make things difficult for them. He carefully folded the paper and put it in his pocket before returning to the palace. When the Empress thought of Renbachian's heroic posture last night, she wanted to laugh. She couldn't help but say, "You said that you would let me see your heroic posture." Renbachian replied seriously, "Your Majesty, just by looking at the first half of the journey, I was unstoppable and invincible. It was a pity that there was an accident in the second half. Otherwise it would have been perfect." The Empress shook her head slightly. "Strength is the most important thing. Even though it was somewhat useful, you have also seen the results." Renbachian nodded. He was clear about this matter. However, he had to practice Rui visualization once a day. By the time he came out, he would already be exhausted. Practicing it twice a day wouldn't have any effect as it was too much of a burden on his body. As for his fists and kicks, he couldn't even defeat a little Lolita every day. It was really not interesting. In the end, the Gatling gun was more to his liking. The nation wants some martial arts manuals and can't wait any longer. Renbachian then talked about serious matters. Ever since the video chat in Milan, 9 months had passed on Earth. Those people had been waiting anxiously. The other party had already mentioned this matter when they went back the previous 2 times. Then give it to them. The Empress didn't seem to care at all. She wasn't very interested in the matters of that world. Let's find some that are easy to learn. It will be easier to see the effects. I think they will be more confident, Renbachian said. The 2 of them went to Qingxin Palace Hall and took out 4 martial arts manuals. 2 of them were easy to learn at the beginning and difficult to learn at the end. The other 2 were easy to learn at the beginning. It was difficult to learn at the beginning, and the practice was slow. However, at the end it was smooth sailing. There weren't many obstacles to advance from the man-will level to the earth-will level. I'll take these 4 manuals. I'm considered generous to give 4 at a time. Renbachian felt that it should be enough to satisfy those people. As for the rest, it was up to them. However, those who were older now had almost no hope. Their descendants, on the other hand, had some hope. In any case, he had to exchange some good stuff for them. Cooperation was one thing, but the other party couldn't possibly gain something for nothing, right? Previously, he had taken a lot of things, which was considered as proof of his sincerity. For things like martial arts manuals, he had to exchange them for a good price. At the same time, Renbachian also prepared to make a copy of these manuals and give them to his family. If he specifically chose more precious manuals for his family, it would be more difficult to practice. Secondly, it would be easy for others to target them, which would be troublesome. Renbachian felt that it was enough for his family to live a good life. He didn't want to stir up too much trouble. Sometimes, knowing more and obtaining more wasn't a good thing, unless he brought them into this world. However, in this impoverished world, it wasn't a good thing for them either. They couldn't even refresh their circle of friends even if they wanted to. The 2 of them disappeared from the main hall. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were already used to this situation. After cleaning the main hall, they went back to rest. The Empress would only be back in 18 hours at the earliest. At this time, it was April on Earth again. It was the season of spring. The trees in the neighborhood were painted green, and the air was always filled with willow catkins. Renbachien opened the windows. The air was still a little cold, but it was noon and the temperature was acceptable. The Empress opened the fridge and took out the ice cream that she had stored inside. In a flash, she appeared on the sofa and switched on the television with her other hand. Renbachien turned his head and looked at the Empress, who looked like an otaku. He couldn't help but sigh and said, "Your Majesty, let's go out and eat first. We can watch the television at night." "Oh," the Empress casually responded. She took a bite of the ice cream and changed the television channel to find a drama that she was interested in. After watching the Japanese tear them apart with her bare hands for a long time, the Empress finally chose to give up. She stuffed the ice cream stick back into the packaging and stared at Renbachien with her big eyes. Chapter 297. Renbachien and the Empress changed their clothes and had a meal outside. Then they went to the supermarket and bought 5 carts of food reserves, all kinds of potato chips, popcorn, candy, chocolate, and of course wine. The two of them connected the shopping carts as if they were driving a train, attracting a lot of attention along the way. After returning home, they ran back and forth a few more times before sending all the things back home. Only then did the two of them settle down. Renbachien downloaded a movie for the Empress. It was the Mandarin version of Final Destination. The unexpected and interesting plot made the Empress watch the movie with great interest and eat a big bucket of popcorn. On the other hand, Renbachien unlocked his phone and read the message. There was Chunqing. After the Lunar New Year, he met Chunqing, but Chunqing didn't seem too surprised. The Chun family was very concerned about Renbachien's matter. As a result, the moment the arrest order was cancelled, they received the news. There were many speculations about what Renbachien had done to actually suppress such a big matter. However, this was also a good thing for them. No one would reject a powerful friend. Other than Chunqing, there were also calls from Home and Yang Senator. He called home first. It was no big deal. His mother urged him to bring his girlfriend home. Renbachien turned his head and looked at the Empress. She was watching television and eating popcorn as if she hadn't heard anything. Next, it was Chunqing's turn. Chunqing had good news. The hangover medicine made from green vine powder had already been approved by the Food Bureau. At the same time, the production line had also been properly contacted. The pharmaceutical factory was in the midst of construction. After all these preparations were completed, the next step would be to advertise and expand the market. The only problem was that the green vines had only been planted for a short period of time, and the output was still not enough. It would probably take some time before the green vines could be distributed throughout the country. Chunqing told Renbachien to go to the Chun Corporation's building when he was free. After all, Renbachien had not been to the pharmaceutical factory that was under construction before. He had also not seen the person in charge. "I'll leave it to you. I'm not very interested in these things." Renbachien directly rejected them. He had enough confidence in the green vine powder hangover medicine. He did not intend to participate in the following events, nor did he intend to participate in the future. He could not stay on Earth for long, so it was better to keep a low profile. Currently, only the country knew about his situation better, and it would be troublesome if other people noticed him. Being an invisible tycoon was the best choice. However, he was the one who came up with the name green vine powder hangover medicine. Blue bottle. Its name was Mana Potion. In the past, when he was playing games, his character didn't have mana, so he just had to drink a mana potion. In people's minds, magic was influenced by spiritual power. Getting drunk would cause a person's brain to become muddled and listless, giving people a feeling similar to losing their mana in the game. So they simply called it Blue Bottle. He had even been ridiculed by Chunqing before, saying that it sounded like the zinc supplements. Use a blue bottle. After hanging up, Renbachien finally called Yang Sun from the Messier 87 department. The call was picked up after 2 rings. "Mr. Run? Your saber has made some discoveries. Yongsun said. Oh. Rinpochen was a little surprised. He thought it would take longer. The blade is made of steel, but there's something else inside. It's a strange thing that seems to have a life of its own. According to Elder Lu's words, that saber of yours is alive, Yongsun said solemnly. Rinpochen wasn't surprised to hear this news. After all, that saber could grow and shrink at will, giving people the feeling that it wasn't an inanimate object. It might be intelligent, and is avoiding our detection. Yongsun's next words shocked Rinpochen. Intelligent. Rinpochen repeated this word. Usually, only mammals could be said to have intelligence, but he was surprised that a saber could be said to have intelligence. It's still a suspicion at the moment, and more experiments are needed, Yongsun said. In fact, there wasn't much progress at the moment. The progress of the research on this saber was slower than they had imagined. Also, what do you think about the previous matter, Mr. Rin? Yongsun finally got to the point. Cooperation. We can't just have one side pay, right? What are you going to use to exchange for the martial arts manual? Rinpochen asked seriously. What do you want? Yongsun asked. Through some of Rinpochen's answers, he was able to judge the situation in that world. Previously, he had already done that, but he didn't gain much. Rinpochen rarely said anything valuable, and even if he did say something, there would be some lies mixed in. First, remove the people who were monitoring me and rummaging through my rubbish bin. This is the minimum sincerity of a partner, right? Someone was monitoring you? I'll send someone to investigate immediately. Rinpochen's words made Yongsun's heart skip a beat. The people he sent were all highly skilled professionals, and they shouldn't have been discovered by him. However, he was, after all, a legendary cultivator. He might have some unknown means of investigation. No matter what, he had to throw the blame away first. Not your people? Then you don't have to send anyone. I'll think of a way to deal with it, Rinpochen said. In his heart, he was wondering if they really didn't send anyone to monitor him. That shouldn't be the case. Rinpochen didn't realize that there wasn't anyone monitoring him. He was just casually bluffing the other party. In any case, he felt that if he was the other party, he would definitely send someone to monitor him. Don't act blindly without thinking. It's a society ruled by law now. Don't ever do that again. If you cause trouble again, there will be no way to clean it up. You can't do the same thing again and again. Don't forget what you promised when you came to Shanghai. Rinpochen's words gave Yongsun a big fright. All right then, you guys send someone to deal with it, Rinpochen said casually. He didn't notice the other party's nervousness. It had to be said that Yongsun was much more experienced than Rinpochen in this aspect. As for the martial arts manuals, you guys can use nuclear bombs to exchange for them. Rinpochen demanded an exorbitant price again, almost choking Yongsun to death. What did you say? What do you want? Yongsun felt that he had heard wrongly. Nuclear bombs, nuclear bombs, nuclear bombs. Important things must be repeated 3 times. Rinpochen repeated with a straight face. What do you want that thing for? How can that thing be owned by a private individual? It's too dangerous. Yongsun growled in a low voice. I also have enemies in the paradise. It's just right to use this thing to blow them up. It's very easy for you guys to make nuclear bombs. The value of martial arts manuals is much higher, Rinpochen said seriously. Do you have a way to transport that thing? Do you have a way to launch it? How do you protect against radiation? How do you prevent leakage? How do you keep it safe? Yongsun asked a bunch of questions in a row. Rinpochen pondered for a while, and realized that he really couldn't do it. It shouldn't be a problem to transport it. A small nuclear warhead wasn't that heavy, but he really couldn't do the launching, radiation protection, and leakage prevention. However, he was just asking for an exorbitant price and didn't really want a nuclear bomb. It was useless to ask for it himself. He couldn't possibly throw one at the capital of Great Xia, could he? Therefore, he immediately took a step back and said, Then how about sarin gas? It's easy to preserve and I can use it. In fact, Rinpochen was just casually mentioning sarin gas. He still had 3 bottles, which were enough. He wasn't prepared to throw sarin gas onto the battlefield when the war started in 2 years. It was too inhumane. If he really did that, he was afraid that the outcome wouldn't be good. Furthermore, the Aboriginals weren't the weaker side, so there was no need to do that. He was even prepared to develop the technology of that world, but he didn't intend to develop weapons. This was because it would make cultivation worthless. That was a civilization that was completely different from Earth. In Renbachian's mind, the combination of technology and cultivation was the way out for them. Only then would they blossom into magnificent flowers of civilization. Instead of creating all kinds of high-tech weapons that even an Earthwill expert like the Empress couldn't defend against, they shouldn't create weapons of mass destruction that even a Cardinal Heaven expert like the Empress couldn't defend against. It's also impossible to use sarin gas. Yang Sun was sweating profusely. This guy was really too dangerous. If he really handed it over to him and he came up on Earth, it would really be a big problem. Based on what he had done in the past, the probability of him having a brain cramp was really not small. Then tell me what you can offer? Renbachian spread his hands even though the other party couldn't see. The Empress, who was beside him, turned her head and glanced at him. Then she turned her gaze back to the television and shrank her body into the sofa. She squeezed herself between two sofa pillows and felt much more comfortable. She really didn't like these troublesome things. Since it's a martial art, I believe that we can come up with some optimization methods after researching it. You know, computers are sometimes more reliable than the human brain, Yang Sun said. This was also the point that they had the highest expectations for. Not interested. Renbachian flatly refused. He hadn't decided whether to take out the martial arts that he practiced or not. Optimizing other martial arts was also meaningless to him. We can provide all the conveniences for your laboratory, including the purchase of various equipment and some other things. Not interested. If it was his own laboratory, it might be useful. However, with his current special status, the country wouldn't stop him if he wanted to purchase some things, right? It was too deceptive to use this as an exchange condition. Not to mention that the laboratory wasn't even his. Yang Sun rubbed his temples. It was really troublesome to deal with the other party. He couldn't give them what they wanted, and he didn't know what they wanted. I will give you a call in a while. Yang Sun hung up the phone and immediately informed his superior to see if he could get some good suggestions. As far as he knew, there should be a think tank that specialized in researching the two of them. They had been researching all the information about the two of them. Renbachian threw his phone aside and started to ponder. What exactly did he want? He had been thinking about this question for a few days, but he still couldn't think of an answer. Equipment? He couldn't bring it over. Technology? What he needed now were the more basic technologies that didn't need to be exchanged. He could get them from the internet and books. As for the more advanced technologies, he would have to wait until that world developed to a certain extent. Blueprints? Similarly, he could get whatever he needed, and he didn't need what he couldn't get now. In fact, he didn't need the most advanced blueprints for many things. Even the brick kiln couldn't be used now. The conditions weren't up to par, let alone other things. Money. Job. They weren't of much use either. Women? Renbachian looked at the person who was watching television and eating popcorn. He lowered his head and pondered again. Renbachian suddenly felt that he was stumped. He really didn't have anything that he wanted. Chapter 298. Renbachian pondered for a long time, and realized that he was stumped. On the other side, there was another group of people who were stumped by him. However, no matter what, they couldn't give up this opportunity. Even if they didn't know what he wanted, they still had to talk about it. Not long after, Renbachian received a call from the imperial capital. Yang Sun can't make the decision and is looking for the higher-ups, right? Renbachian thought about the number and picked it up. The other party didn't speak, and neither did he. Since you called, I don't believe that you won't speak. Seeing that the other party didn't speak, Renbachian laughed in his heart. Were they putting on airs? He put the phone on the coffee table and put it on speaker. Then the sound of the Empress watching Final Destination was transmitted to the other side of the phone. Renbachian glanced at the phone screen from time to time and realized that the call had been hung up after a minute. What's going on? Is it because I left a big shot hanging for too long, and the other party isn't satisfied? Big shots can't be so petty, right? Renbachian muttered. Those big shots had to deal with a myriad of issues every day and didn't have the time to dawdle. Could there be a problem somewhere? While he was pondering, the phone rang again. This time he picked it up and immediately heard a voice. Is this Mr. Ren? I called you just now, but there was no sound from your side. The person on the other side of the phone wasn't very old, but his voice was very magnetic and easily made people feel good about him. It's me. Renbachian was dubious about the other party's words, but only a fool would study this problem. Please wait a moment. After that person finished speaking, Renbachian heard a rustling sound. It seemed like he was passing the phone to another person. Mr. Ren. This time, the voice was very calm and familiar. At least he had heard this voice on video for a period of time last year. Besides the Empress, this person was the most awesome person he had seen in his life. It was impossible for him to not remember him. Hello, big shot. Renbachian's voice was very respectful, like a primary school student meeting the principal. However, he directly lay on the sofa and conveniently snatched a popcorn from the Empress. Slap. The Empress gave him a backhand slap without hesitation. Previously, his hand was swollen like a pig's trotter, but now it was just a little red, and there were 4 fingerprints on it, which were extremely distinct. However, compared to before, it was already much better. Renbachian mimicked a cat and licked the back of his hand. When the Empress saw this action from the corner of her eye, she immediately had the urge to give him another slap. Mr. Ren, your parents don't know about your situation, right? The person on the other end of the phone laughed. What do you mean? Renbachian immediately became alert. Don't you want to teach things like cultivation methods to your parents? Renbachian thought for a while and said, this doesn't seem to have much to do with our deal. Actually, after that video, I thought about it for a long time. I don't think an old man like me would be able to cultivate. The other party continued. Renbachian nodded in his heart. The other party was right. He really did not think that those big shots would be able to cultivate. Not to mention that they were too old. They had so many things to do every day. How could they have the time to cultivate? Actually, it's just a fantasy. Through the simulation of cultivation methods, we can find out the factors that affect people's lifespans. However, this requires someone to cultivate to a certain extent first. I believe that Mr. Run and Madam Chi will not assist in the research. In that case, I don't know how long it will take for someone to cultivate to a stage where their lifespan will be affected. I'm afraid that an old man like me will not be able to see it. Seeing that the other party had already considered this issue, Renbachian nodded and said, you are right, I'm not very optimistic. Therefore, we just want to leave something for future generations. Even if this kind of cultivation method is given to us, it will spread sooner or later. This thing can't be hidden. It just depends on whether it's 10 or 20 years. The final result will be the evolution of the entire human race, and a huge change in human society. At that time, even I can't predict what kind of changes will happen to the rules of human society. Nevertheless, I still want to leave something for future generations. Perhaps this is the key to the evolution of all human beings. Don't you think so, Mr. Ren? Renbachian thought for a while, and felt that the other party didn't want to pay him. This wasn't very good, right? This wasn't the way to cooperate, right? Boss, allow me to say something. Even though *** is comfortable for both of us, we still have to pay, Renbachian said respectfully. The person on the other end of the phone immediately spat. The Empress was stunned for a moment. She was probably trying to figure out what the word *** meant. After all, this word was too far away from her. Then her eyes widened and she scratched a hole in the pillow with her claws, causing the cotton to fly out. It's just an adjective. Stay calm. Stay calm. Renbachian covered the phone with one hand to appease the Empress. In the end, the Empress gave him another slap on the back of his hand. This time, there were 8 crisscrossing finger marks on the back of his hand like an LV. The Empress slapped Renbachian, and then grabbed the pillow with all her might, making the room look like heaven. In heaven, there were feathers flying everywhere, and in the room, There were cotton wadding flying everywhere. What Rinpochian said just now was really too wretched. Even the Empress had such a reaction, let alone the person on the other end. He was immediately dumbfounded, and only laughed bitterly after a long time. I don't know how to answer your question. Rinpochian's words were really too suffocating. Crude words but not crude logic. Rinpochian laughed mischievously. What do you want? Just say it, the person on the other end of the phone said straightforwardly. Nuclear bomb. Rinpochian was interrupted halfway through his sentence. You don't have to say such things, just tell me the truth. Rinpochian thought for a while, and realized that he really didn't need anything at the moment. As for money, he still had 90 million euros left from the 100 million euro loan. The other party didn't mention anything about repayment. They didn't even mention the time limit or interest rate, so he didn't need to think about repaying the loan. Or he could consider repaying the loan in the future when the inflation reached the point where buying a loaf of bread would cost 3,000 or 2,000 euros. I brought 4 martial arts manuals with me. One condition for each martial art manual. I will mention it when I need it. It won't affect the nation, and I won't demand an exorbitant price. It might be to collect something, for example, certain blueprints or some rare items. Try your best to help me collect them. Or, if I do something wrong again in the future, help me settle it and consider it as fulfilling one of the conditions. Rinpochian raised his own conditions. For martial arts manuals in exchange for 4 conditions. Speaking of which, it wasn't a loss. After all, he really couldn't think of anything that he needed. It was acceptable to keep the 4 conditions, and mention them when he needed them in the future. I can promise you the first condition, but it can't violate the nation's laws and regulations. It can't go against morality and also can't demand an exorbitant price. The nation will also act according to its capabilities, and will try its best to help you if it can. As for the second condition, Mr. Run, forgive me for being blunt. Given your status, the previous incident shouldn't happen again. As long as Mr. Run doesn't find trouble with others, no one will find trouble with you. Who knows, a few days ago there might be a surviving member of the Jean family rummaging through my rubbish bin to find evidence of my crimes. Rinpochian conveniently made a scapegoat. Since he had nothing better to do, it would only take a few words, so why not? Chapter 299. In the end, both parties came to an agreement. In the afternoon, 3 cars arrived, and more than a dozen people alighted to carry the 4 secret manuals, and a text comparison table that Rinpochian had written before into a password-protected box. At the same time, they left behind a memo stating that the big shots would recognize today's conditions in the future. Of course, no one knew what would happen when the time came. No one could predict something that far in the future. Rinpochian felt a lot more relaxed after settling the matter. He felt the cool breeze blowing in from the window. In the past, after experiencing a harsh winter, it would feel good when the flowers bloomed in the spring. It was as if the bodily functions of the body had become more active. However, he didn't feel much after returning from Dayo. After all, the temperature in Dayo during winter was almost the same as summer here. There wasn't even the slightest bit of bleakness. Naturally, he didn't feel as if his body and heart had been revived after experiencing a cold and bleak winter. He casually looked at the news on his phone, and suddenly realized that the hover motorcycles that were equipped within the rich nation last year were actually ready to be launched on the market. In the past, it took a long time for an item to be launched on the market. However, he only spent half the time, so he felt that it was much faster. This thing is quite interesting. Rinpochian carefully looked at the parameters of the hover motorcycles. It mainly used a drone to lift the body of the vehicle, and could fly at a height of a few to 10 meters above the ground. What is it? The Empress heard Rinpochian's voice and stretched her head over. The 2 of them were almost touching. This distance was already considered normal for the 2 of them, and neither of them felt that there was anything wrong with it. This is a flying motorcycle that can fly at a distance of a few to 10 meters above the ground. It's quite interesting. In the future, we won't have to worry about crowds on the streets. Rinpochian showed her the item on his phone and laughed. The Empress's eyes began to shine as if it was something very interesting. I want this. The Empress immediately made the decision. This thing could fly at a height of 10 meters. It was a little dangerous for ordinary people, but it wasn't a problem for the Empress. Even ordinary aboriginals wouldn't be too worried. However, it consumed too much electricity. It could only fly for about half an hour with a full charge, and its speed wasn't fast either. It could only be considered an oversized toy at a speed of 48 kilometers per hour. It seems that we have to speed up the installation of electricity in the palace. Rinpoche started to use his phone to search for solar energy storage batteries. After all, he still needed electricity to play with some interesting things, such as this flying motorcycle. After searching for a long time, he finally found a battery that met his requirements. It had a capacity of 3000 Ah, which was equivalent to 36 kilowatt-hours of electricity. One battery was equivalent to 10 ordinary batteries that he used before. The Empress could switch on the air conditioner and look at her laptop. At the same time, she could switch on those light strips. This was enough for her. The weight was 255 kilograms. Although it was a bit heavy, it could still be taken away. At the thought of this, Rinpoche immediately called the manufacturer. After making some inquiries, he ordered 10 of these batteries, 100 ordinary batteries, and a set of solar crystal panels. Then he found another merchant and ordered 100 sets of street lighting equipment. Then, he went to a rental website to look for a storage unit. For the next 2 days he was busy with this matter. First he rented a warehouse in the suburbs. Then he asked the 2 merchants to transport the goods to the warehouse by truck. Through Chengqing, he hired 2 security guards to guard the warehouse. None of this could be hidden from the public, and the nation would easily find out. Rinpoche didn't care either. What's wrong with batteries? Why can't I use my phone or something? It would be strange if the Blessed Enclave had electricity. After getting someone to send a battery to his house, he and the Empress returned to Yangxin Palace Hall. Currently he had more than 300 kilograms of strength. It was just enough to bring back the battery, the Empress, and a small portion of the Empress's snacks. With this battery, the electricity problem in Yangxin Palace Hall was completely solved. With 3000 Ah of electricity, even if all the light strips were switched on, it would still be enough to last for 8 hours. Just 3 batteries would be enough to last for an entire day. Furthermore, he had ordered 10 batteries. Even the spare batteries were sufficient. Rinpoche could once again enjoy the days of electric lights and air conditioner. 10 of these batteries would take about 10 trips. It would take close to 2 months in Dayo and half a year on Earth. Next, he still had to bring those street lighting equipment and ordinary batteries over. Within half a year, Dayo should be able to complete all the street lighting projects in the palace. Although it would take a long time, the scenery in the palace would definitely be exceptionally beautiful. Rinpoche was also filled with anticipation. This was a midterm plan. In the short term, the school at Black Bamboo Academy would start the day after tomorrow, on the 6th of January. He would welcome a group of useless second-generation students. On the morning of the 6th, Rinpoche woke up early, washed up, ate his breakfast, and left the palace for Black Bamboo Academy under the accompaniment of the guards. It was a rather big and empty courtyard. There were 3 bungalows in the middle, and there were still buildings under construction at the back. At the corner of the courtyard, there was a frame with a few pulleys on it. Although the courtyard was leveled, it wasn't neat. After all, the construction had not been completed. Transporting sand, cement, and red bricks would make the courtyard very dirty. Rinpoche looked at his watch. It was 7:30. There was still half an hour before 8. However, none of this batch of useless second-generation students came early. They really didn't know how to respect their teachers. But it didn't matter. They would understand after leaving this place. Rinpoche believed that he would educate them into a new generation of aboriginals who were well-developed morally, intellectually, physically, and aesthetically. After he finished pondering, he saw a few youths walking in his direction. There were 4 men and 1 woman. They were dressed like ordinary people, and they should be some of the commoners who were selected later. When they got closer, Rinpoche asked for their names and confirmed that it was true. Subsequently, more people came in succession. The first to arrive were all commoners, and there were a total of 19 of them. Including the people sent by the court officials, there were a total of 50 people. When it was almost 8 o'clock, Renbachian saw a youth riding a fork-horned cow staggering over. When the cow got in front of Renbachian could smell the stench of alcohol. "Name?" Renbachian asked expressionlessly. "Tai Jiaxiong." When that youth saw the person in front of him, he restrained himself and said respectfully. Although he wasn't willing to come here to learn anything messy, he still had to pay attention to the person in front of him. "Go in and find a place to sit, the house in the middle." Renbachian pointed to the back, and that Tai Jiaxiong quickly went in. After him, the others arrived one after another. Many of them brought along their servants, and more than half of them were late. Furthermore, a few of them reeked of alcohol, and had a look of disapproval on their faces. They were only here because of their family's instructions, just like Tai Jiaxiong. Renbachian sneered in his heart. "What a bunch of idiots. Here, I will let you know why the flowers are so red." Tonglan bounced to Renbachian and greeted him. "You good for nothing. I'm your teacher here, so you have to call me master. Otherwise, you will either be beaten with a ruler or brought back by Sir Tong," Renbachian said with a straight face. Tonglan bared her canine teeth, and in a flash, she went into the courtyard. She even turned around and snorted at Renbachian before arrogantly walking into the room with the loudest voice. Following that, there was Shirgan, the youngest son of great elder Shirqing. Although he was only 12 years old, he wasn't short and was about the same height as Renbachian. He looked rather simple and honest, but Renbachian remembered that he threw his shoe at him. This fellow wasn't a good person either. After everyone arrived, Renbachian turned around and closed the door, isolating the servants' gazes from the outside. The inside and outside were two different worlds. Chapter 300. As one of the only 3 classrooms in the academy, the room wasn't small. The chairs and tables inside were arranged neatly, exactly the same as those on Earth. However, it was still very new to the Aboriginals. None of the people here had ever studied in such an environment before. At most, the elders in their families would teach the younger generation how to read and write, and they would read by themselves and ask for help if they didn't understand something. As a result, it was very refreshing to have dozens of people crammed into the classroom. The commoners were better off as they were relatively quiet. Although they were commoners, most of them were the children of petty officials, or had some kind of relationship with them. The remaining 30 or so people began to call their friends and make a ruckus. Renbachian could hear the ruckus from afar in the courtyard. He walked into the room with a sneer. Although the noise was much softer, it was obvious that they didn't care much. "Quiet." Renbachian knocked on the table, but the noise wasn't much softer. In particular, the voices of those who were hungover were particularly loud. Renbachian stood in front of them, glanced at them expressionlessly, and said again, "What are you bunch of useless people doing here?" As soon as he said this, the room suddenly became quiet. Everyone stared at him, and many of them looked angry. If it weren't for his special status, they would probably have started a fight. "It's better than someone being hung on a pillar," someone said, and everyone burst into laughter. "Ha ha ha ha." Renbachian's expression didn't change, but he made a mental note of Shirgan. "Although I'm not strong, at my level, you can participate in the lantern show and even touch the lampstand. I'm afraid that others won't even bother to look at you," Renbachian continued. "Let me clarify something here. It's not that I want to take you in, I just want to take in a few disciples. It was your elders who sent you here. To put it bluntly, you are a bunch of useless people who can't do anything and won't be able to do anything in the future. Your elders don't want to see you at home like pets for the rest of your lives, so they sent you here." Renbachian continued to sneer. After he said this, many people's faces turned red. Many of them weren't talented in their families, and they knew that Renbachian's words were like a knife poking at their wounds. As the saying goes, don't hit someone in the face and don't expose their shortcomings when scolding someone. Renbachian was taking turns to hit someone in the face and expose their shortcomings, specifically picking the most painful spots to hit. Who are you calling trash? Someone stood up and scolded. Isn't that so? Don't you have any F***king idea why your elders sent you here? Renbachian had a malicious look on his face as he mocked them to the max. Let's see who's the real trash. A young man shouted angrily and smashed the table into countless pieces. He then stomped on the ground and pounced toward Renbachian. Umph! The corners of Renbachian's mouth curled into a sneer. His eyes were filled with malice as he raised the Type 81 rifle and fired. He had already guessed that this would be the result. When he entered, he picked up the Type 81 rifle and placed it on the podium. 222. 3 gunshots rang out, and the man fell to the ground with blood spurting out of his body. Originally, many people were waiting to watch a good show. They didn't expect such a sudden turn of events. Immediately, they were dumbfounded. Their gazes lingered on the Type 81 rifle in Renbachian's hands as they tried to guess what it was. Look, even a child can kill you with such a simple thing. If you aren't trash, then what are you? Renbachian continued to mock them maliciously. At the same time, he turned to Su Wei and said, "Drag him out and throw him to the clinic. Let the doctor cut open his wound and take out the bullet. Also, inform his family that this trash will be trash for the rest of his life. There's no hope for him anymore. Keep him as a pet." Renbachian's malicious words made everyone's faces turn ugly. The man on the ground almost vomited blood. He struggled to get up from the ground with blood oozing from his right shoulder, right arm, and collarbone. Renbachian tilted his head. He wanted to hit the man's shoulder just now, but his hand shook. Su Wei went forward to pick up the man. He still wanted to resist, but Su Wei twisted his arms and carried him out of the classroom. After a while, he came back and continued to stand in the same corner. Look, you don't even know what strength is. In my eyes, all of you are trash. Of course, in the eyes of others, you are the same. Renbachian continued to mock them. I'm different from them. Don't confuse me with them. Tongluan immediately retorted. At the same time, she sprinkled a handful of salt on the wounds of others. Many people glared at her, but there was nothing they could do. Shirgan curled his lips. He also wanted to say this. You are slightly better than them. Renbachian had to admit that according to the standards of this world, Tongluan could be considered a genius. However, you are only slightly better. All of you don't know what strength is. Tongluan was immediately unconvinced when she heard this. Even you can't beat me. But I have 10,000 ways to kill you. Renbachian spread his hands. That stick? Tongluan looked disdainful. Even though the thing that shot out from that stick was very fast, she believed that she could still dodge it. There are 10,000 people in Great Xia who had the same idea as you. Now their bones have turned into ashes. Renbachian's words immediately reminded everyone of some rumors. However, the Aboriginals only valued strength and would subconsciously belittle, or even ignore such things. In particular, Renbachian's weak strength always made people feel that he was very harmless. It made people forget that he was also a killer and had killed countless people. In addition, he was unscrupulous just now. He injured a person, and even threw him out. Even though they still looked down on Renbachian's strength, they didn't dare to be as unscrupulous as before. First of all, you have to understand your own status. You are useless, and this is undeniable. Right now you have 2 choices. First, stay here obediently and try your best to not be so useless. Second, go back and tell your elders that you are useless and are beyond redemption. Naturally, you don't need to come here anymore. Just like that idiot just now, you can go back and tell your elders that you are useless and can no longer be saved. Then you will be kept as pets at home. Renbachian mentioned pets 3 times in a row, which deeply hurt everyone's heart. Those who want to leave can scram now, Renbachian said again. However, this time no one was impulsive. Even Tongluan curled her lips. Renbachian nodded slightly. The Aboriginals weren't so bad-tempered. At least they knew what was good and bad and could still listen to advice. This was considered a good sign. First, I want to tell you what I can teach you. What I can teach you isn't much, but it isn't little either. The most important thing is what exactly strength is. Even though everyone was still furious, They could finally listen to him quietly, unless they were like the person who was thrown out just now. Tongluan, how much strength do you have? Renbaqian casually asked. About 3,000 kilograms. Tongluan mumbled. Renbaqian cursed in his heart. A 10-year-old girl could have 4,000 kilograms of strength. The aboriginals were indeed abnormal. He wasn't the only one who felt that it was abnormal. The others immediately turned to look as well. One had to know that even though the aboriginals were strong, four-way heaven experts only had 500 to 2,000 kilograms of strength. Kismet heaven experts generally had 2,000 to 4,000 kilograms of strength. Except for some gifted people like Xiong Pai, most of the others were like this. Great Xia practitioners were much weaker in terms of strength. They only had a little more than 1,000 kilograms of strength, while Earthwill experts couldn't exceed 2,500 kilograms. As a result, the strength of the aboriginals far exceeded that of the Great Xia practitioners of the same level. Tongluan was only 11 years old a few days ago, but she actually had the strength of 2,000 kilograms. This young lady from the Tong family could really be considered a genius. This made many people jealous. Why wasn't they the one with such talent? In that case, do you know how to move something that weighs 40,000 kilograms? Without destroying anything, you're the only one. That's impossible. Tongluan immediately said. If it's impossible, I won't say it. In that case, let me ask you another question. Can anyone lift themselves up? Your weight is about 200 to 300 kilograms, and your strength is several times that. Can any of you do it? Renbaqian looked at the crowd below and asked. Then he really saw a few idiots trying to lift themselves up. Chapter 301. Why can't you lift yourself, who weighs 200 to 300 kilograms? It seems like a simple task, but none of you can do it. Renbaqian looked at the crowd. There were 49 students, 34 boys and 15 girls. They ranged from 13 to 18 years old. Renbaqian saw that everyone was looking at him doubtfully after they tried it. It was as if they were wondering why they couldn't do it. Renbaqian then said, "This is what I want to teach you. What is force, how is force conducted, and how is force used? How can you do things that you can't do? How can you move objects that are several times heavier than your own strength? Of course, the most important thing is the nature and principle of matter in heaven and earth. This subject is called physics. You should be glad that you can sit here and listen to me talk about this because it clarifies the nature of matter in heaven and earth. After learning this, you can truly see the world. Everyone here should know me. Let me introduce myself again. I'm Renbaqian, also the superintendent of this Black Bamboo Academy. You are the first batch of disciples here, so you can call me teacher. Towards a person who can teach you knowledge. A person who can decide whether you stay or go in this academy. You must maintain sufficient respect. At the same time, as a pioneer in knowledge and someone who knows more than all of you combined, you must also maintain sufficient respect. Do you understand? Renbaqian propped his hands on the table and looked down at everyone. Everyone understood, but no one said anything. Understood, teacher. The person who spoke was a young man named Su Ping, who was considered an ordinary disciple. After he spoke, the other ordinary disciples followed suit. What about you? Are you mute? My words are very clear. I'm the boss here, so you have to answer my questions. If you don't want to stay here, go home and be a pet. Now, do you understand? Renbaqian raised his voice and said coldly. Understood. 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 Everyone was intimidated by Renbaqian's imposing manner and answered softly. Louder. Is this a food market? It's so messy. Renbaqian frowned and looked dissatisfied. Understood. This time the voices were much louder, but it was still very messy. After all, it was difficult for these undisciplined Aboriginal youths to answer at once. Although this was an extremely simple matter for the Earthlings, it was not a difficult task. Renbaqian nodded slightly and said, A country has its laws, a family has its rules, and an academy has its own rules. When the time comes, I will tell you what you can and can't do. If you violate the rules, you will be beaten and punished if you deserve it. In serious cases, you will be expelled from the academy, just like that idiot just now. You all know your own situation very well. Most of you have a foreseeable future. You will achieve nothing and have no value. All you can do is maintain this state of being alive. Yes, it's a state. You look alive, but in reality, there's nothing. You're all hollow. Even if you peel off your skin and put it on a wooden frame, there's no difference between you and yourself. Because this is how you are. Your insides are empty, nothing at all. You only have the appearance of being alive. Although many people are like this, do you want to be like this too? This Black Bamboo Academy is your only chance to learn something, to do something, and to leave something behind. Let those who think that you are useless open their eyes wide and look at you in a new light. Therefore, cherish the opportunity to learn here. This is your only chance. Rinpoche said word by word as he looked at everyone. Following his words, the expressions on many people's faces changed. Anger, unwillingness, contemplation, and various other expressions appeared on their faces. Ever since they were young, this was the first time someone had spoken to them like this. It was also the first time someone had said these things to them. Rinpoche had pointed out their future. Although they were unwilling, they had to admit that his words were correct. It was just like what he said. Only two people were different from the rest. One was Tonglan. She turned her head to look at everyone's expression, then looked at Rinpoche before turning her head to look at everyone again. It was as if the expressions on everyone's faces were very interesting to her. The other was Shurgan. His eyes were dull, and it was obvious that he was daydreaming. Rinpoche waited for everyone to digest what he had said before continuing. Every day, school starts at 7 a.m. and ends at 2:45 p.m. Lateness is strictly prohibited. There are 4 classes every day, and there will be a 15-minute break between each class. Currently, there are 4 subjects. The first one is language. The language that you are currently learning is too complicated and needs to be simplified. This is the simplest subject, but it also includes basic moral and quality education. A civilized society is bound to be orderly and has a certain moral standard. Moral standards are often higher than the law. Just like not bullying the old and the weak, this is the most basic moral standard. The second subject is mathematics. I don't want to see you counting with your fingers for addition and subtraction of more than 10 digits. You only have 10 fingers, which isn't quite enough. The third subject is physics, which is what I just said. It is the natural science that studies the most basic structure of the material world, the most common interactions, the most general laws of motion, and the experimental methods and thinking methods used. The fourth subject is chemistry, which is also a natural science. It mainly studies the composition, nature, structure, and laws of change of matter, as well as the creation of new matter. The first 2 subjects are the basics, and the last 2 subjects teach you the essence of this world. There will be an assessment every month. Those who fail the assessment will be punished. Those who fail multiple times will be expelled from the college. Do you understand? Rinpoche asked loudly. Understood. Although everyone said that they understood, they were actually dumbfounded. What were the last 2 subjects talking about? They didn't understand at all. We have already learned how to read. Why do we have to learn again? Tonglan raised her head and asked. In the future, you have to raise your hand to ask questions. You can only ask questions with my permission, Rinpoche said in a deep voice. Then he explained. You have learned the language of Great Xia, which is too complicated, difficult to write, and not easy to spread. What I am teaching you is different from Great Xia's, and it is more suitable for promotion. I hope that in the future, at least many people in Dayo can read and understand the news and newspapers, instead of the current situation where 99% of people are illiterate and have to guess what they read. What's the news? What's the newspaper? The little girl continued to ask. The news is something that happens in this world. It is recorded so that everyone can know about it in a timely manner. As far as the situation in Great Xia, as near as what happened in Lan City, as far as national affairs, various government decrees, and as low as the fight between your grandfather and Sir Chin in the brothel last night. Chapter 302. What did Deputy Prefect Ren talk about today? During dinner, Tang Jingye casually asked Tang Lan. He was really curious about what Ren Baqian would talk about. In his heart, Ren Baqian had a lot of good stuff. Whether it was the cement, red bricks, glass factory, or solar furnace, they were all very useful. Furthermore, he took them out casually. No one knew how many things he had in his stomach. At the very least, he didn't know about the colorful things that he saw in Yangxin Palace Hall. There were also the 2 floor lamps of the Empress, the sofa in Yangxin Palace Hall, the computer that could emit sound, and the ice that was made from ice. There were simply too many of them. This was also the reason why he sent his favorite granddaughter to Yangxin Palace Hall. I don't know. He talked a lot and was very long-winded. Tang Lan curled her lips. She really didn't understand many of the things that Ren Baqian talked about today. However, how could she ask since no one asked? She was a genius. Tell me, what did he talk about? Tang Jingye asked again. He said that they are all good-for-nothings. If they go home, they can only be kept as pets for the rest of their lives. Studying at the academy is their only chance. Tang Lan consciously excluded herself from the conversation. There was also an idiot who wasn't convinced. In the end, that good-for-nothing used a stick to shoot a few things at him and beat him to the ground. Then he was chased out. Tang Lan giggled again. Tang Jingye nodded his head slightly. Ren Baqian's words were correct in some aspects. Those who weren't talented weren't valued at home. They couldn't advance in their cultivation and wouldn't be able to achieve anything in the future. They could only take the monthly allowance to produce offspring. He also said that he wanted to teach us 4 subjects and teach us how to read. It's different from before, Tang Lan continued. Oh, how different? Tang Jingye was very interested and asked. The surrounding people didn't say anything as they listened to the conversation between the adult and the child. They were also very interested. At least when Tang Jingye was in the residence, he praised Ren Baqian a few times. This caused the people in the Tang residence to view Ren Baqian differently from the general view of the outside world. He said that the language of Great Xia that we used in the past is too cumbersome. He wants to teach us a simpler language that is easier to spread. Tang Lan repeated Ren Baqian's words about how many people could read the news. From national affairs to your fight with Mr. Qin at the brothel last night. Tang Lan told him everything in full detail, and the entire hall quietened down instantly. There was dead silence. Everyone had a strange look on their faces. Cough, cough. Tang Jingye coughed. Soon after, he thought about the news that Ren Baqian mentioned. However, it didn't make much sense no matter how he thought about it. It was similar to a notice board. What else? Tang Jingye continued to ask. There are also 3 subjects: mathematics, physics, and chemistry. He said that physics is the study of the structure and laws of the world, and chemistry is the study of the composition of the world and the transformation of new substances. These 2 subjects are called natural sciences. Tang Jingye's expression immediately turned serious after hearing what Tang Lan said. Tang Lan didn't know what this meant, but she immediately sensed some problems. According to these words, he was clearly talking about the way of all living things in the world and nature. Didn't this mean that he was talking about all the principles in the world? If that was the case, then what Ren Baqian said was rather shocking. But was what he said true? What did he say? Tang Jingye pondered for a moment and said, "Remember what he said every day and bring it back for Grandpa to see." Oh. Tang Lan pouted and replied. It was too troublesome for her to remember. She felt that she was in big trouble. On this day, there were many people who had the same conversation. Many of them didn't care about what Ren Baqian said at first, but after listening to others, they paid attention. After all, Ren Baqian's words were too scary. Studying the structure of the world, its composition, laws, and the transformation of new substances. No matter how they heard it, it wasn't an ordinary thing. The way of all living things in the world and nature. Many people immediately thought of the legendary way of heaven. How could they not care about it? At this moment, the Empress was curled up on the sofa. Ren Baqian was sitting on a small stool outside the courtyard of Yangxin Palace Hall. There was a bonfire in front of him and a rack on top of it. Ren Baqian was roasting a leg of lamb. One hand was shaking the stick while the other hand was cutting the leg of lamb. In the past, Renbachian always thought that there was nothing that couldn't be solved with a barbecue. If there was, then he would have two. However, there weren't any lamb skewers here. He could only rely on himself. He slowly roasted a lamb for 2 hours. The smell of the roasted meat had already spread to Yangxin Palace Hall. The Empress sniffed, turned her head to look in the direction of the main hall's entrance, and continued to watch a television series. Just when the Empress's patience was about to run out, Renbachian came in with a basin. It was emitting an extremely fragrant barbecue aroma that made people salivate. As for the guards outside Yangxin Palace Hall, they had a look of hidden bitterness on their faces. That person had been roasting meat under their noses for more than 2 hours. The two of them had been smelling the aroma for more than 2 hours. It was simply a kind of torture. Renbachian and the Empress sat opposite each other at a small table. Renbachian poured a cup of wine for the Empress and a cup for himself. It definitely wouldn't do to eat barbecue without wine. There were also 2 plates of fruits at the side, so that the roasted meat wouldn't be too greasy. The Empress stuffed 2 big pieces of meat into her stomach and drank a cup of wine before asking casually, "I heard that something happened on the first day of school?" The Empress already knew about this news, but she only asked about it now. An uncut jade can't be useful, and an uncut person can't be straight. I'll teach them a lesson first so that they can be disciplined in the future. Renbachian smiled casually. Even though those guys weren't very talented, they weren't honest. If he didn't suppress them from the start, it would be difficult to discipline them in the future. Oh. The Empress nodded her head. I reckon that someone will complain about us tomorrow. Renbachian continued. Umph. The Empress snorted coldly. How dare they? Renbachian gave her a thumbs up. I like this domineering style of yours. What was a backer? This was it. Regardless of whether what he did was right or wrong, anyone who dared to raise an opinion would be beaten up. I heard that you are going to talk about the principles of heaven and earth. I'm very happy. Even though the Empress's tone was flat, there was still a hint of happiness in her words. This was because she knew that what Renbachian was going to talk about could really advance the development of Dayo, was the foundation of that world, and was truly important. She was very happy that Renbachian was willing to teach these things to others. This was because she was the Empress of Dayo, and she would never only think about one family or one place. I have said before that I will make Dayo what you want it to be. Renbachian raised his cup from a distance and drank it. The Empress's eyes curved when she heard this. Renbachian took out a blue flower from his sleeve and placed it on the table. I see that many flowers have withered recently, but only this flower has been blooming all along. I feel that it is like you, it will never wither. When other flowers bloom, it will overshadow the others. When other flowers wither, it stands out. The Empress picked up the flower and looked at it. Then she pinned it on her clothes and said faintly, this flower's name is Qingyang. It will only wither during the cloudy season before it blooms again. When it withers, even the heavens can't bear to part with it, so they shed tears. And when it blooms again, the heavens will also show their happiness. Renbachian continued the Empress's words. He gave himself a thumbs up in his heart. Coaxing a girlfriend required strength. Seeing the Empress wrinkle her nose, Renbachian knew that she was very happy. This was a small action of hers. Wrinkling her nose meant that she was in a good mood and very cheerful. And raising her eyebrows meant that she wanted to kill someone. If the Empress was happy, he would also be very happy. Emotions were contagious, whether it was happiness or sadness. Looking at that exquisite face, which was still full of heroic spirit after letting go of her coldness, but also had a unique charm that was unique to her, Renbachian felt that if he could live for 200 years, he would definitely coax her for 176 years. Those 24 years were the days before him. Chapter 303. Renbachian looked at the people below him. They seemed to be much better than yesterday, and their attitudes were also much more respectful. Today we'll talk about physics. Renbachian said to everyone. Logically speaking, he should talk about the written language first, but he still felt that he should arouse everyone's interest first. After all, this wasn't Earth, and the Aboriginals didn't have the habit of studying. He had to let them maintain a certain level of interest in learning. Everyone below looked at him attentively. It seemed that the words he said yesterday had some effect. For the first lesson, let's talk about the motion of objects. Renbachian picked up a stone and placed it on the podium. Is this stone stationary or moving? It's still, someone answered immediately. Renbachian nodded, picked up the stone, and let it fall to the ground with a soft sound. Was the rock still or moving? We're falling. Answer whether it's stationary or moving. Renbachian emphasized. Sports. Can a rock move? Renbachian asked. Everyone was stunned when they heard this question. Could the stone move? Renbachian picked up the stone and moved it up and down with his hand. Is the stone still or moving now? What still is your hand? In that case, Renbachian loosened his grip again and let the stone fall to the ground. Is it stationary or moving? Teacher, the rock is falling down. The rock itself can't move, but it will move when it falls down. Tonglan was the first to react. You're half right. You are sitting on a carriage, or on the back of a horse. The horse is moving forward, and everything around it is moving backward. Who is moving? You said the mount is moving? But you didn't move, but your mount and your position didn't change. Instead, everything around you is moving backwards. What I want to tell you is that stillness and movement are relative. This stone is in my hand, and relative to my hand, it is still. But compared to this classroom or all of you, this stone is moving. You fell from the sky. You didn't move, but everything around you was moving. Mechanical motion is the most common motion in the universe. Everything in nature moves, but it depends on what the reference is. Humans are born with a good nature. Their natures are alike, but their habits differ. If one does not teach, one's nature will change. In the way of teaching, the most important thing is to be focused. In the past, Mencius's mother chose a neighbor. If you don't learn, you'll break the rules. Renbachian used a piece of chalk to write Chinese characters on the blackboard. He wrote down the first 5 paragraphs of the 3-character classic, a total of 60 characters. Then he wrote the corresponding words of this world below each character. You have to write it all down and memorize it. Humans are just like that. Idiot, the character for Ji is a dot, a horizontal fold, and a restrain. What is that thing of yours? Who is Mother Meng? Let me tell you a story called Mencius's Mother Moved 3 Times. For today's homework, you must write these 30 words 10 times and hand them in tomorrow. Bring your own paper and pen. If you don't have it, just ask me. Answer me again. What's 6 plus 3? If you dare to say 11, I will kill you right now. Renbachian roared with a ferocious look on his face. His hand was already touching the Type 81 rifle. A tall and sturdy young man looked around blankly. Then his eyes lit up. 6 plus 3 is 8. Bang. Remember how to write each number, from 1 to 10. Today's math homework. 2 plus 7 plus? For plus 9 equals? When Renbachian was in school, he had thought of volunteering as a teacher after graduation to leave a memory for his life. However, he became addicted to Bilibili and threw this idea to the back of his mind. He didn't expect that he would become a new generation of assisting teachers in remote areas. This could be considered as fulfilling his original dream of volunteering as a teacher. Seeing that everyone had left the school, Renbachian clutched his chest and felt that he was going to have a heart attack from anger. He remembered the news that he had seen in the past. Parents who accompanied their children to do homework were so angry that they suffered heart attacks and cerebral hemorrhages. What are you guys? I'm a total of 49 idiots. Sigh, let's take it slow. Renbachian finally sighed, got the guards to tidy up the classroom, closed the school doors, and returned to the palace. How was it? The Empress asked Renbachian with a smile. Renbachian hadn't returned to the palace yet, but the Empress already knew about his rant at the school. They are a little stupid, but they can still be saved, Renbachian said after thinking for a while. Although he was infuriated by those idiots just now, he knew that learning wasn't something that could be done in a day or two. The scene of his old teacher pointing at him, and saying that he was a good-for-nothing was still vivid in his mind. He didn't want to easily deny the future of these people. The role of a gardener was to water the flowers so that the flowers could grow, bud, and finally bloom. The Empress nodded. It was good that Renbachian could say this. After lunch, Renbachian met a few people at Pingle Park. They were the shopkeepers of the 2 caravans in the palace. I have seen what you have done over the years, and I can't say that it's good. Look at your list. This kind of sour wine actually costs 10 taels of silver for a jar? 30 taels of silver for a bolt of silk? Also, the final price of the things that you sell are far lower than the market price. If not for the fact that you have always been relatively honest, I would have suspected that you are secretly helping outsiders. Renbachian patted the paper on the table and said, Sir Ren, it's not that we want to do this. It's just that they are buying our goods at low prices. If we don't sell them at low prices, we simply can't sell them. Also, we know that the prices of these goods are expensive, but we really have no choice. Upon hearing Renbachian's words, the expressions of the 2 shopkeepers immediately turned ugly. They looked as if they had been wronged. If you really have any problems, you should know Her Majesty's temperament. As for me, you will know in the future. I will be in charge of this aspect in the future, and you have to report to me. I am different from Her Majesty. Her Majesty has too many things to worry about every day, and she can't be bothered with these things. I am not that easy to talk to. If you do a good job, you will be rewarded. If you don't do a good job, you will be punished. I hope that all of you will do your part. Naturally, I will not treat you unfairly. Otherwise, think about the consequences. He didn't know whether these 2 shopkeepers were secretly helping outsiders. In any case, no matter how he looked at the list, there was something wrong. No matter what, he had to give them a warning first. The goods this year are different from the previous years. This year, we have these 2 things. Renbachian opened a box beside his feet, took out a goblet and a classical cup, and placed them on the table. Following which, he took out 2 mirrors. Both of you, take a look. How much can these things be sold for? These are cups? They are so clear and transparent. I wonder what material is used to make them. I think they can be sold for at least 500 taels of silver each. These mirrors are also different from copper mirrors. They are actually so clear. They will be sold for at least 1,000 taels of silver each. The 2 shopkeepers took a careful look at the cups one after another. Their faces revealed an astonished expression. The cups were completely transparent, and even the fine hairs on their faces could be seen clearly in the mirror. Renbachian looked at the 2 of them carefully and asked, Don't tell me you are spies sent by other countries? Sir. The 2 of them were shocked. These cups are sold for at least 5,000 taels of silver each. They are completely carved out of clear and transparent gemstones. You are telling me that these craftsmanship and materials are worth 500 taels of silver each? And this mirror, it is so clear and bright that it can reflect the scene perfectly. It will be sold for at least 30,000 taels of silver. One had to know that when Venice first produced mercury mirrors, they were still covered with tinfoil. At that time, they already cost 150,000 French francs. Not to mention, these mirrors with more perfect craftsmanship were worth 30,000 taels of silver. If not for the high production rate, and the fact that glass would appear in many places in Dayo in a few years, he would have wanted to sell them as soon as possible to make a fortune. He even wanted to raise the price a little. Sir, no one will accept this price, the 2 shopkeepers whispered. Are you fools? Renbachian almost poked their heads with his finger. There are many brothels in those 2 countries, right? Find the best brothel and give them a sum of money. Let their most popular courtesan hold 2 cups and auction them on the spot. The highest bidder wins. Let me tell you, brothels are the places with the most childs. They are also the places that can fetch the highest price. Sell a pair of cups in one place and then sell them in another city. The brothels are easy to deal with. Give them 1,000 taels of silver, and all the money will go to us. Otherwise, we can split the profits with them. If not, give them 500 taels of silver. During the auction, the starting price will be 5,000 taels of silver. We will give them the extra money. Do you think they will agree? Or you can find an influential child and give him a pair of cups. The request is nothing else but for him to introduce this item to others. When the time comes, you will give him a commission. For each cup that he sells, you will give him another 500 taels of silver. Once you have made a name for yourself, there will naturally be people who will take the initiative to buy it from you. As for this mirror, you have to remember this saying. Love lasts forever, and the silver mirror will last forever. This mirror is the best token of love to give to your sweetheart. As for those who have been married before, what else in this world is more precious than a mirror that can reflect your own appearance? Men's mouths are all fake. Only this mirror will not lie to you. Renbachian gave the two of them a sales lesson for 4 hours in a row, and both of them were dumbfounded after listening to him. Chapter 304. Remember, who are our customers this time? It was the local tyrants, the officials, the aristocratic families, and the ambitious people. Why should we sell things to them? Because only they should have these things, and they deserve to have them. Because only our things can highlight their identity and value. Only then can they show their nobility, and only then can they get what they want. Whether it's for their own use, for their dream lover, or for their boss. Doesn't he want to have it? It doesn't matter, let his opponent have it first. For the next few days, Renbachian would teach the disciples of the academy in the morning, practice boxing in the afternoon, or get beaten up by Tong Lan. At night, he would teach the two shopkeepers of the caravan whose heads were made of wood. What sales? Renbachian sat on a stone chair in Pingle Park. The two shopkeepers, who were in their 40s or 50s, were standing obediently like primary school students. These few days had broadened their horizons. Solving the needs of our customers. The two shopkeepers immediately answered. How do we do sales? Create demand for our customers. Renbachian nodded slightly. These two wooden heads could finally understand some logic. What's our product? It's our identity and value. People need to increase their value through external objects. The two shopkeepers were full of jargon. If the Empress were to see them, she would be shocked. Okay, remember, we aren't selling products, but identity, self-expression, love, high positions and generous salaries. The only thing we aren't selling is products, Renbachian summarized for them. Yes, sir. The two nodded in unison with a look of conviction. They really didn't know where this man in front of them learned these things from. The two of them felt that they had benefited a lot from these few days of lessons. Now, even if they were given a pile of feces, they would sell it for the price of gold. You may leave. Memorize today's lessons well and set off in 2 days. Renbachian waved his hand. Sir, we will record everything every day when we go back and compare it with each other. The two of them said respectfully. Well, when you do it, you will know what self-worth is. Renbachian waved his hand to get the guards to send them out of the palace. After the two of them left, he felt a little regretful that the time was too short. Otherwise, he could have tried what a pyramid scheme was. Right now, they could only rely on what they had learned over the past few days. Fortunately, with his products, he didn't have any competitors, so he didn't have to worry. Even if there were some twists and turns, he believed that the two of them would give him a satisfactory answer. The goods he had prepared were 2,000 goblets, 2,000 vintage cups, and 1,000 silver mirrors. However, it wasn't all at once. Instead, it was divided into 4 trips. The first time, the quantity was the least, and the second time, the quantity gradually increased. Of course, the price was the highest for the first time, and then it gradually decreased. His goal was to earn more than 30 million taels of silver from Dayo and the Yun nation for this batch of goods. This was a huge sum of money for Dayo. Great Xia's annual treasury revenue was 100 million taels of silver. The Yun nation's treasury revenue was 31 million taels of silver, and the Chen nation's treasury revenue was 22 million taels of silver. As for Dayo, which was equivalent to the combined size of the Yun nation and the Chen nation, its annual treasury revenue was only 7 million taels of silver. Half of the income came from the remnant citizens of the Hao nation in the southern region. Out of these 7 million taels of silver, 3 million taels of silver would be spent on military expenses every year. For an army of 100,000, excluding food and some basic armaments, each soldier would only receive 12 taels of silver a year, which was equivalent to 1 tael of silver a month. One had to know that the weakest soldier in Dayo was at the manual level. In other countries, the same level of strength would receive at least 6 to 10 times the salary. It was no wonder that the protectorates of Dayo were reduced to relying on the income from brothels to supplement their income. As for the remaining 4 million taels of silver, it was used for the salaries of all the officials in Dayo, the monthly salaries of the craftsmen and odd job workers, city repairs, and so on. There was almost no surplus. As a result, Dayo basically didn't have any spare energy to build infrastructure. Even the official roads were only flattened with dirt. The imperial treasury had been buying weapons to replenish the army year after year, and basically didn't have much money left. The additional 8,000 taels of silver for cultivation had shrunk the Empress's treasury by a large margin in 3 months. At most, it could only last for another 3 months. Renbachian's monthly cultivation expenses were about 50,000 taels of silver. In other words, other than those rare and precious items, the Empress's treasury only had 300,000 taels of silver. This included the gold, silver, and jewelry that were sent by people from other countries for this year's birthday celebration. Renbachian carefully calculated the accounts and felt that it wasn't easy for the Empress to be an Empress. Fortunately, the Empress was willing to do this and didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. The Empress was probably the poorest among all the civilized countries on Earth and in this world, with the exception of the African brothers. Even the Empress was like this, let alone the ministers. Renbachian pondered about the situation in Dayo for a while. Earning a sum of money would only solve the urgent situation. Dayo still had a long way to go. He put aside his thoughts and decided to take it step by step. Lying on the bed, he entered a spacious and empty space. In the entire space, there was only a towering tree in the middle. It was unknown how tall it was. The crown of the tree covered a radius of more than 10 kilometers, and there were countless green vines twining around the trunk. This was the second visualization after breaking through the visualization of water, the visualization of wood. Water was related to wood. Therefore, after completing the visualization of water, he didn't need to visualize anything else and directly entered the visualization of wood. The 5 elements corresponded to the 5 internal organs. The visualization of water corresponded to the kidneys and the visualization of wood corresponded to the liver. Renbachian's current practice was to climb up the tree trunk in vines. However, as long as he was more than 3 meters above the ground, the surrounding wind would blow like a storm from all directions, making it difficult for him to even breathe. His entire body had to cling to the tree trunk in vines with difficulty. While resisting the strong wind to stabilize his body, he climbed up bit by bit. When his strength was exhausted, he would be blown down and directly exit the visualization of wood. After a while, Renbachian was blown down from a height of 5 meters. When he woke up, he was already back on the bed and fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, Renbachian first took a medicinal bath, and then went to Yangshin Palace Hall. Today was the school's day off. Renbachian had brought the big week from Earth over. Previously, when the students had a break, Renbachian took the opportunity to return to Earth to order some things. Today, he and the Empress returned to Earth to collect them. These included the teaching materials that the students needed: elementary school mathematics from grade 1 to grade 6, junior high school physics and chemistry materials, a volume of the 3-character classic, and some experimental materials. Originally, Renbachian had considered the rules for disciples and the Analects of Confucius. However, after thinking about it, he gave up. This world was different from Earth, and the Aboriginals were different from ordinary people. The biggest difference was that the importance of martial arts in this world was much greater than that on Earth. Mechanically applying the words of Confucius might not necessarily be good. When Renbachian walked into Yangshin Palace Hall, he saw a red shadow flashing and moving in the hall. At the same time, it was as if there was a strong wind blowing in the hall. Following every movement of the Empress, he could feel the strong wind blowing in the hall. Renbachian took a closer look and realized that the Empress was practicing a set of boxing techniques that he didn't know the name of. Every time her fist struck out, there would be a loud sound of breaking the air. Renbachian quietly watched from the side. Rather than saying that he was watching the Empress practice, it would be better to say that he was watching that figure. In any case, he couldn't understand the movements of the Empress. In fact, he couldn't even see them clearly. After a while, the Empress suddenly stopped moving. She slowly lowered both her hands. It was as though water vapor was spurting out from her palms and directly smashed onto the green tiles below. It was unknown what material the floor tiles of Yangxin Palace Hall were made of, but they actually didn't break. "How much do you understand?" The Empress turned and asked him. "You are indeed worthy of being called Your Majesty. I can't even see your movements clearly. However, I will try my best to keep up with Your Majesty's footsteps. In time, I might be able to see the mystery of Your Majesty's boxing technique." Renbachian immediately gave her a thumbs up. The Empress stared at him and subconsciously gritted her teeth. Just now, she had deliberately slowed down her movements, but this bastard actually didn't see it at all. "There is no need to wait for time. From today onwards, you will practice this boxing technique with me." The Empress snorted. "Your Majesty, we have changed our departure today. Previously, we said that we are going to the amusement park." Renbachian said with a smile. Ever since the Empress watched Final Destination 3, she couldn't forget about the amusement park. Chapter 306. In a room, there were several computers. Each screen was divided into 9 screens, monitoring various locations in the neighborhood, including the elevator, the underground parking lot, and the entrance of the neighborhood. All the surveillance cameras in the neighborhood were connected to this place. However, this wasn't a surveillance room. It was a 3-bedroom house in the neighborhood. Because the curtains were drawn every day, strangers would come in and out from time to time. Someone thought that they were doing some illegal activities and called the police. When the police came yesterday, the people in the room were confused. They only sent the police away when someone took out their ID. They didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The people in the room were speechless when they thought about it. The residents of this neighborhood were almost as vigilant as the omnipotent Chaoyang people. "How do you think they found us?" A short-haired woman looked at the surveillance camera impatiently. They were originally watching the house opposite with binoculars. As long as the other party came back, they would find out. However, they suddenly found out that they were exposed. They moved here in a hurry and stared at the surveillance camera every day. Who knows? Don't forget the instructions from above. They aren't ordinary people. Another young man wearing glasses took out a cylindrical metal object and took a puff. Then he puffed out a large amount of smoke. After a few puffs, the room became like a fairyland. "This thing smells much better than your cigarette." The short-haired woman turned her head and said. The young man with glasses spread his hands. "I wanted to smoke. But since you had such a big reaction, I changed it to this. However, this electronic cigarette is not bad. It's much better than I thought." "You're sensible this time." The short-haired woman leaned on the table. "Last time, those 2 people suddenly appeared in the room. Is there really such a thing as a superpower in this world? Who should I ask? The boss might know." "You can ask the boss." The young man with glasses took out a glass bottle from the side and used a dropper to draw some solution on the electronic cigarette. Then he began to puff again. Looking at his intoxicated expression, it was obvious that he was smoking an electronic cigarette. Those who didn't know would think that he was smoking DU. "They're back." The woman quickly patted the young man with glasses. On the screen in the upper left corner, a person suddenly opened the window. "It can't be a housekeeper, right?" The young man looked at the screen. The angle was from the bottom up. He couldn't see the inside of the house, only the window. This was also to prevent the other party from discovering them again. "No, this isn't the time for housekeeping," the short-haired woman said. After that, the 2 of them began to focus on the monitor. After the target appeared, The two of them had to constantly pay attention to when the other party left. If it was before, it would be fine. They could just use the binoculars to see when the person in the room left, but now they had to constantly stare at the surveillance camera. No wonder she looked so unwilling. Why do you think we're watching them? The short-haired woman still couldn't figure out the problem. Her previous missions all had a mission objective, and she knew what she had to do. But this time he didn't do anything at all. He just kept an eye on them and reported their itinerary. It had already been a few months, and there were still no orders from above. You can ask boss, I don't know. Of course, Renbachian didn't know that the last time he cheated them, the two of them had to stay in a small room for more than 20 days, and were full of resentment. He pushed open the window. The weather today was pretty good. Earth had already entered the beginning of May. The weather during the day was over 20 degrees, and the sun was shining brightly. It was a good time to go out and play. When he opened the window and turned around, he heard the sound of the door closing. The Empress had gone to change her clothes. She didn't even eat her ice cream. From this, it could be seen how impatient the Empress was. It was hard to imagine why the Empress was so interested in the amusement park. By the time he went upstairs and changed into a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, the Empress had already changed into a dress and was sitting on the sofa eating ice cream. Sure enough, to the Empress, eating was something that couldn't be neglected. It was just a matter of time. Let's go to the amusement park. Renbachian snapped his fingers, and the Empress threw a pillow at his face. I feel that action isn't very respectful. The Empress nibbled on the ice cream and looked at him from the corner of her eyes. How can that be? It's just an action to emphasize my tone. For example, eat your fill. Renbachian snapped his fingers again, and another pillow was thrown at his face. Your Majesty, it's time to set off. Renbachian stretched out his right hand, held 3 of the Empress's fingers, and bent down. Not bad. The Empress was very satisfied. She helped him tidy up the hat on the back of his head. Her fingers were clean again. Otherwise, the melted ice cream would be sticky on her fingers. When they went out, the elevator stopped at the 7th floor. A young girl came in, and was surprised to see the two of them. Then she bowed to them. Thank you for that time. The girl thanked him. Even though she went to look for Renbachian and wanted to treat him to a meal, she was rejected. Now when she thought about the fire incident, she still felt a lingering fear. Therefore, when she saw Renbachian, she immediately expressed her gratitude. Coincidentally, the collar of the girl's shirt was quite big. Renbachian naturally took a glance. Pow! The Empress slapped Renbachian's nose. Ouch! Renbachian groaned in pain and covered his nose. The Empress didn't even look at him from the side. How did she know? His nose was a little wet. When he stretched out his hand to touch it, there was a smear of red. There was really blood flowing down. Renbachian quickly raised his head, took out a roll of money from his pocket, and stuffed it into his nose. Why did you hit me? Renbachian stuffed his nose and spoke in a muffled voice. Just now, he clearly saw that the Empress didn't even turn her head to look at him. Intuition. The Empress turned her head and looked at Renbachian. Renbachian. Your Majesty, you have definitely watched too many Final Destination movies. You just wanted to hit me all of a sudden, right? In any case, it didn't matter if you hit me indiscriminately. Even if you hit me wrongly, it would be in vain. When the girl saw the two of them covering their mouths and giggling softly, she saw Renbachian glaring at her and quickly said softly, Sorry, I couldn't help it. When Renbachian walked out of the elevator, he took a glance at the acrylic mirror at the side. There was a roll of money stuck in his nose like an elephant, but it was a pity that it wasn't very symmetrical. The two of them drove all the way to the amusement park, which was the largest amusement park in Shecheng. From outside, they could hear the rumbling and screams of the roller coaster inside. The Empress's attention was immediately attracted by it. That's the one. The Empress's eyes lit up. It seemed like Final Destination 3 had really left a deep impression on her. Even when she came to the amusement park, she went straight for the roller coaster. It was unknown if it was because the weather was too good, but there were people everywhere. Many of them were parents with their children, and there were also pairs of couples. Chapter 307. Even though the amusement park wasn't crowded, there were still quite a lot of people. In particular, there were more people in front of the roller coaster. After all, there weren't many things for adults to play in this amusement park. The two of them queued for more than half an hour. The Empress was eating ice cream as if nothing had happened while Renbachian was playing with his phone with one hand and holding the Empress with the other. "Will there be any problems?" the Empress suddenly asked. Renbachian looked at the Empress and had a bad premonition. Normally, the probability of a roller coaster malfunctioning was similar to that of a plane crashing down. However, the Empress couldn't forget the performance of the Return of the Grim Reaper, and suddenly said these words. He was afraid that even if there weren't any problems, she would still create problems. A certain great man once said, "If there are difficulties, you have to face them. If there aren't any difficulties, you have to create them." The Empress couldn't possibly be doing this to satisfy the excitement of imitating a movie, right? "Actually, I have a fear of heights. I will wait for you below." Renbachian saw that the people in front had already started to enter. After saying this, he turned around and was ready to stop the roller coaster at any time. The Empress moved faster than him and grabbed his collar. No matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't escape. "Are you going to leave me alone?" the Empress asked. She pointed to the surroundings and saw that there were only two people in pairs. Then, she looked at the last bit of egg roll in her hand reluctantly and threw it into her mouth. "If I don't go up, they will thank me," Renbachian whispered in a serious tone. The Empress didn't say a word. She dragged him forward and conveniently rubbed against his clothes. Renbachian was shocked when he saw her reaction. Had he guessed correctly? "Are you serious?" However, he didn't dare to shout. Feeling the strength of the Empress pulling his collar, he grabbed the railing at the side. "I won't go up even if you beat me to death." The surrounding people looked at the two of them and found it funny. This man was too timid. If his girlfriend was so beautiful, he wouldn't even bat an eyelid even if he went up a mountain of knives or a sea of fire, let alone riding a roller coaster. However, this woman's hands were so strong that the man's fingers turned white as he held onto the railing. Then the Empress poked Renbachian's lower back. Renbachian finally quietened down. His entire body went limp and he couldn't exert any strength at all. After fastening his seatbelt and pressing down on the U-shaped seatbelt, he finally regained some strength. He looked at the Empress nervously and whispered, "They are all ordinary people. If something happens, it will be a big problem." The Empress turned to look at him with a smile that was as beautiful as a flower. "It's okay, I'll be gentle." Renbachian was about to spit out blood. Anything that happened on the roller coaster would be a big deal. What was the use of being gentle? These words were not comforting at all. Renbachian observed 3 minutes of silence for the people on the roller coaster and hoped that nothing serious would happen later on. Following the ringing of the bell, the roller coaster began to move forward slowly, and Renbachian's heart began to race. At first, it was still all right. The speed was very slow, and it kept moving upwards. Renbachian felt a little dizzy looking at the ground below him. Renbachian's heart began to beat faster as the roller coaster rapidly descended. As the roller coaster moved at a high speed, it made a 360-degree turn in the air from time to time. Renbachian gripped the seatbelt tightly and let out a miserable howl. A dash! Bang! Renbachian suddenly heard such a sound. Before he could react, his entire body began to lose gravity. If it wasn't for the fact that he was still holding onto the seat belt with both hands, he would have been flung out. However, the seat belt was now being lifted up. F***ck. Renbachian was really howling this time around. Help! His miserable howl could cover half of the amusement park. He thought that the Empress would tamper with the roller coaster, but he didn't expect her to tamper with his seat belt. Fortunately, the Empress's small hand grabbed onto Renbachian's clothes at the waist, which made him feel relieved. Then the Empress actually let go. She let go. She let go. Renbachian was going crazy. She was trying to murder her husband. At this moment, the seat belt was completely unbuckled, and the seat belt on his body was also broken. Renbachian held onto the seat belt tightly and looked like a kite fluttering in the wind. Then the Empress suddenly extended her arm and grabbed his wrist, making him feel a little safer. However, at the same time, the Empress's other hand gently knocked on the seat belt, and the metal seat belt immediately broke. Ren Baqian held onto the broken seat belt with both hands, and was fluttering in the wind while being held by the Empress. A dash. Ren Baqian's howl became even more miserable. At the same time, many people below also realized that there was a problem with the roller coaster, and many people cried out in alarm. In the eyes of outsiders, the boyfriend's seatbelt broke, and his girlfriend held onto him tightly without letting go. Such a scene that always appeared in movies appeared in front of everyone's eyes. How touching was this scene? Many people below took out their phones and started to take pictures. At the same time, they felt that they had no regrets in life with such a girlfriend. However, at this moment, Ren Baqian even had the intention to kill someone. At this moment, the roller coaster's controller realized that there was a problem and hurriedly slowed down and stopped the roller coaster. Then everyone was hung in the sky. However, Ren Baqian was especially miserable at this moment. One of his hands was tightly held by the Empress, and the other hand was tightly holding onto the body of the car. With more than 600 kilograms of strength, the car was almost out of shape, but he didn't let go at all. Finally, he was rescued with great difficulty, and Ren Baqian was about to go crazy from anger. Although he had the strength to ensure that even if the seat belt was unbuckled, he would still be able to hold onto the shoulder straps and not fall, but he couldn't play like this. He had acrophobia. "Sir, I'm really sorry. Do you want to go to the hospital first? The person in charge is on the way here." A staff member at the side hurriedly came forward to welcome him. "Ignore me." Ren Baqian's face was full of irritation. Even a clay figurine would have some anger. Ren Baqian felt that he needed to express his attitude. Ever since he was rescued, he had been putting on a straight face. After the Empress came down, he didn't look at her and only said, "I don't want to play anymore. Let's go back." Even a blind person could hear the coldness and resentment in his voice. It's indeed meaningless. The Empress propped her chin with one finger and turned her head to look at her surroundings. This roller coaster was more boring than she had imagined, but she still wanted to go to some other places to play. However, seeing Ren Baqian's completely different tone, she first blinked her eyes and then looked pensive. There were actually many people at the side who applauded the Empress and praised her for holding on to her boyfriend tightly and not letting go. Ren Baqian felt even more depressed. After the two of them walked for a while, the Empress's cold and puzzled voice sounded. "Are you angry?" "Very angry." Ren Baqian lowered his head to look for money on the ground and didn't look at her. "Look at me." The Empress grabbed his arm. Ren Baqian turned his head to the other side. Then a soft hand pulled his chin back. The Empress's eyes were always bright, clear, and pure like a lake, but at this moment, they were somewhat flickering. Looking at the resentment on Ren Baqian's face, the Empress blinked her eyes and pulled Ren Baqian's face closer to her. She kissed him. It was a little cold, very soft, and had an alluring fragrance. Ren Baqian felt his heart beating like a pile driver. Thump, thump, thump. What kind of situation was this? Ren Baqian's eyes widened. The Empress blushed from her ears to her face. She lowered her head slightly and didn't look at his eyes. Her eyes were filled with embarrassment. Cough, cough. Since you already know your mistake and have reflected deeply on it, let's go for another spin. Ren Baqian suddenly felt that it was just a roller coaster. It wasn't impossible to consider going for another more exciting ride. Chapter 308. Ah! An earth-shattering scream was heard from the drop-off machine in the amusement park. When the drop-off machine was rapidly descending, a man's seatbelt suddenly broke, and he almost fell off. Fortunately, the lady beside him caught him. Not only was the man screaming, but the other people on the drop-off machine were also screaming. And their screams were even louder. After all, everyone's hearts were about to jump out of their chests when something like that happened around them. When the drop-off machine landed, everyone ran off as if they were running for their lives. The long queue instantly retreated a few meters. Who would dare to do such a thing after such a thing happened? Ren Baqian was sweating profusely. Even though he knew that the Empress would catch him, His heart was still in turmoil. "Sir, are you all right?" The staff hurriedly ran up to him. "I'm all right. I don't look like I'm all right. Don't worry about me. I'll take a rest." Renbachian felt his legs turn to jelly. At this moment, not only did Renbachian's legs turn to jelly, but the staff at the amusement park also felt their legs turn to jelly. Such an incident had just happened on the roller coaster, and the roller coaster was still under maintenance. They didn't know how long it would take before it could run again. Now such an incident had happened to the drop-off machine. Seeing that the two people had left without a word, the staff couldn't possibly stop them. No matter how these two people were going to cause trouble for the amusement park in the future, it was the responsibility of the person in charge. Furthermore, who knew if these two people were going to make a phone call to cause trouble now? When the person in charge of the amusement park rushed over and saw the person on the surveillance camera, he was confused at first, and then his expression changed. Previously, this was the person who had an accident on the roller coaster. Now it was him again. How could it be such a coincidence? Furthermore, the cause of the accident was the same. The seatbelt had broken. And both times he didn't want any compensation, not even an examination. He just left without saying a word. He wouldn't believe that these two people were alright even if he was beaten to death. However, how did the seatbelt break? One had to know that the seatbelt wasn't made of nylon rope, but metal, and it couldn't be broken by humans. Could it be that these two people were really a coincidence? The person in charge now had a balance in his heart. On one side, the two people were here to cause trouble, and on the other side it was really a coincidence. At this moment, both ends of the balance were constantly moving up and down. One moment, the left side was tilted, and the next moment, the right side was tilted. Renbachian looked at the Empress with a do-as-you-see-fit expression on his face. The Empress lowered her head and hesitated for a long time. She then used the tip of her foot to rub against the ground. Finally, she created a hole in the ground. Then he gritted his teeth, raised his head, and moved toward Renbachian. Oh, last time, there was still a little feeling, but this time, not only did he not feel any charm or softness, he only felt sore and numb, and tears were about to come out. He didn't know if it was intentional or not, but the Empress's nose directly bumped into his. It looked like a light bump, but the strength of the Empress's body was comparable to that of steel. She didn't feel anything at all. Renbachian immediately covered his nose and tears welled up in his eyes. His nose was bleeding like tap water. A moment later, Renbachian stuffed 100 yuan bill into each of his nostrils and looked at the Empress with bright eyes. He made up his mind and kissed her. This time the Empress wouldn't seriously injure him, right? As the saying goes, first time unfamiliar, second time familiar. Then the Empress raised her chin slightly, and the two red ivory tusks that protruded from the nose directly poked the Empress's face. Renbachian covered his nose again, and this time his tears really came out. This was the first time he knew how painful it was to have money stuck in his nose. "I think I need to go to the hospital." At this moment, Renbachian's eyes were brimming with tears. He pulled the money out and threw it aside. His nose was extremely painful. Previously, it was only the bridge of his nose that hurt, but this time, it was the inside of his nose that hurt. He suspected that if he used more strength, the two bills would poke into his brain. At that time, his brain would really be filled with money. Seeing that Renbachian was really crying this time, the Empress blushed shyly and leaned over to give him a light peck on his lips. The blood that flowed from Renbachian's lips also stained her red lips. The Empress stuck out her tongue and gently licked her lips. Her face became even redder. Feeling the softness that he had just touched and looking at the Empress's actions, Renbachian suddenly felt that he could actually persevere for a little longer. "Let's go to the overturning seas and rivers." Renbachian pinched his nose and pointed into the distance. It was just like when he pointed to the distance and said, "Our journey is in the sea of stars." In his heart, he inexplicably thought of a famous musician who once said very artistic words. Life isn't just about the present, there are also poems and beautiful women. The overturning seas and rivers was also a large-scale amusement park. There was a rack that was 20 meters tall, and when people sat on it, they would be lifted up to a height of tens of meters. Then, they would rotate 720 degrees in the air for 2 rounds before being lifted up to another direction, and rotated 720 degrees for 2 rounds. The excitement wasn't any less than that of a jump tower. One had to know that it was a 720-degree rotation from a height of 20 to 30 meters. Renbachian felt that he had already given it his all today. However, the others didn't want him to give it his all. When the two of them arrived at the overturning seas and rivers amusement park, they realized that there wasn't a single queue in front of them. After all, there had already been 2 incidents at the amusement park today. How stupid would they have to be to continue playing such a dangerous attraction? Then, the staff member looked at Renbachian, who had unwiped bloodstains on his face and body as if he had run from the scene of a car accident. All the large-scale attractions have been closed for inspection today. Closed for inspection? There's no other way. We can't play anymore. Renbachian didn't know if he should feel regret or rejoice. However, 2 incidents had happened consecutively. Even if the boss of the amusement park was a fool, he would still conduct an inspection. The Empress furrowed her eyebrows and was a little dissatisfied. The previous 2 incidents weren't very fun. Initially, when she looked at this amusement park from afar, she felt that it would be more fun than the previous 2. After the 2 of them left, the person in charge heaved a sigh of relief when he heard the news. Just now, when he heard that the 2 of them were heading towards the overturning seas and rivers, he immediately asked someone to stop the equipment. He couldn't stop the equipment even if he didn't. After the previous 2 incidents, no one dared to play today. At the same time, he was certain that the 2 of them were definitely here to cause trouble. It was a pity that he didn't have any evidence. Otherwise, he would definitely teach them a lesson. However, he was also somewhat puzzled. If the other party was here to cause trouble, why didn't they take the opportunity to blow things up and not ask for any compensation? Furthermore, the 2 safety belts weren't cut off by someone. Instead, they seemed to have been cut off normally. The cut wasn't neat. These 2 points were what he couldn't understand. In any case, the reputation of the amusement park would definitely be tarnished this time. If these 2 incidents were to spread, it was unknown how many customers would be lost. At the very least, it would definitely be greatly affected before this incident was put to rest. Renbachian and the Empress returned to the car. Renbachian looked at the Empress beside him and had the urge to turn his head and kiss her. This was probably the meaning of the phrase, tasting the marrow. In particular, the previous 2 incidents were like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. He really wanted to have a good taste of it. Unfortunately, the Empress didn't know if she knew what he was thinking. She raised her hand and was ready to slap Renbachian's face at any time. Of course, if she really wanted to slap him, Renbachian wouldn't be able to react in time. This action of hers was more of a deterrent than anything else. Renbachian grabbed her hand, put it in front of his nose, sniffed it, and gently kissed her fingers. The Empress's ears turned red again. Then, she bashfully and flirtatiously slapped Renbachian's nose. "Let's change the location next time," Renbachian said with tears in his eyes as he fumbled to find a tissue to stuff his nose. A while ago she was a thug. Why did she change to slap his nose today? Your Majesty, where did you learn this from? P.S. Recommending a friend's new book, Little Cultivation Streamer. In an era when the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was scarce, cultivators had already gone into hiding. On a certain live streaming platform, a masked male streamer appeared. He would lead the netizens to unveil the mysterious veil of the cultivation world step by step. Thank you to Kunlun Mountain for the rocket. Thank you to Kongtong Sect for the plane. Let's go 666 again. I'm going to perform my physical body to withstand the lightning tribulation. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.